if you make comments, we ask that you please identify the street you live on. I don't know why we don't want you to identify your name, but I think it would be a good idea to do
We
that
ask for
too.
the
Name and street.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to open with a chance to hear comments.
I have a comment.
Council member Sisna is recognized. A seat has been held for her.
Right.
Hello.
Okay. Anybody have a comment other than...
I would defer to other people if there are others who want to offer any.
Any other comments?
Comments from
Bonnie?
I have a comment.
You have to stand up and identify yourself, please.
My name is Bonnie Ball, and I live on Summit Avenue. I got a notice about the Liebman property, the development starting, but my next door neighbors didn't. And it brought up a question that may have been moot since I have been derelict about attending meetings or being interested in much of this. But was there a period where we stopped having a meeting, we sent out a form for the residents to be able to respond to, and we got a copy of the plan? Was that terminated?
No, I don't think so. Aren't we still having meetings?
No, we haven't had
With
one in 2 years, probably.
Really?
Yeah.
Because no one
Tear down and
came?
rebuild in 2 years.
What? Tiffany, what'd you say in here?
I mean, I know that we did them for the tear downs and rebuilds on Bradley. But those houses are at least almost 2 years old.
Yeah, and it was never required.
No,
it was
I
a
understand.
convenience, and it was thought at the time, hardly anybody came, that notification of neighbors would be sufficient. But there's no reason we could not have meetings, could not restart the process.
Right, well,
Do we have
imagine.
It might not be necessary to do that, but I remember in my 13 years of being the assistant manager, what we did was we would send out a copy of the plans, we'd hand deliver them, as a matter of fact, just stick them in the door, and there would say, if you have anything that you would like to comment on or have concerns or questions about, come to the next meeting. And that way it put the onus on the residents to show up. If they cared enough, they would come, and if not.
Right, and just so that it's clear that it was, after we passed the building code, that if the plans met the building code, that while the neighbors or those interested could come and see the plan, talk to the architect, talk to the builder, in order to raise any questions about the process. But if the plans met the code, neighbors can't say, well, I want you to move that garage.
It was a powerless offer.
Right.
But
maybe that's why nobody came. Just excuse
came
me.
one time, and that was enough.
Please, there's a woman behind you wants to say something.
No, I'm Lauren Beal. I'm on Dead End Delfield, and we went through that process as well. And as someone who built a house recently, and it was actually it was lovely for us as entering you're starting a construction project to be able to have an opportunity for a formal way for all of the neighbors to come together, for you to meet them, for them to understand that you are a well-intentioned person, that you mean no harm. I think that it is a very fraught moment, and I do think that while there's not an opportunity to kind of change something, that there is it has an important place in building.
That's a good point. Good.
Yes.
It really is, and that's the point I'm going to take up now, because as you all know, I wrote you all about this endangered species tree that's on my property that is about to get slammed by the Liebman development, because it's my understanding now, of course rumors are everywhere, that they're going to move that house and build another. They're going to kind of shift and build, so there'll be 2 houses on that property, and that endangered species tree is going to be included. And having one of these opportunities to meet the builder, meet the architect, I could have said to him personally, hi, I have property abutting this, and I just would like to tell you how necessary they are repository of a lot of rainwater that comes down off of Summit, and every tree that stays there is going to help their property as much as I would like to hang on to that endangered species tree.
Right.
So this process, like Lauren says, would give me the opportunity, rather than having to wait to catch the architect there. I'm not combating the development at all, but these are things that a neighborly, well-run machine would be able to do. There would have been, some more communication.
Well, I've known-
What's the status of that?
Yeah, that is exactly what I was going to say.
She mentioned she got a notification. Is that from us or is it from Montgomery County?
I've never seen it.
It's
No,
from
it was
it's
from-
from us. So far, all they have plans to do is take out their chimney. They are planning to come back to us in November, I believe, for more full-scale plans of what they intend to do.
Drawings about whatever. that
Right.
is.
So, I mean, there are, as of now, there are no plans, so to speak. They're just, we sent out something as a courtesy to residents to let them know that the chimney was getting taken down.
Okay, so our process would be that when the builder comes in with their information, as Doug's doing his review, and I don't remember this, we wait until after the approval process, and then that's when we had the open meeting. I think we did it
Right.
before usually a council meeting or
Right.
separately.
Or
And
sometimes
it was a
separate.
sometimes it was a
Separate.
separate meeting.
Okay,
But-
so
Right.
does that, I mean, I think that helps in some ways that there are no plans. The only thing that they're doing right now is the chimney. But when we do get plans, the same process will apply. That there will be a review of the plans by the building administrator, and then the public meeting for, all residents are invited to any public meeting.
Although Arthur said those public meetings have been discontinued.
Yeah, we have not had them for
We
the
did them
last.
for the
We did
tear downs
have a
and
few,
rebuilds on Broadway.
but not for the last 2 years. I think if you go back and check.
Did we have any
but
tear downs in the last 2 years?
Oh, yeah.
Behind-
We just.
But
no,
when was
it-
yours
it was-
done,
We were
Lauren?
around 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Maybe
it was
a little more
deliberate.
than 2 years ago.
Okay.
We've been in the house for a year. It was a year of
Right,
building,
right.
so.
Well, I think it's a worthwhile practice
I
that
think-
we
I
ought to
do think it
continue
is.
for
Yeah.
all of the reasons you're talking
Not
about.
that necessarily, it's just
Yeah.
we can share some information.
But now the question would be, we get a lot of things going on in properties. Is it for everything, just for a tear down? What rule of
Oh, for
thumb
a
do we
major,
apply
yeah.
for a major project? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Lauren.
I think there's something different about entering a neighborhood when you don't already have relationships in place with people. And I think that for a modification to a home where, you already know your neighbors and you can have those conversations is a slightly different thing. So
Yeah.
I think that it makes more sense, and I don't know the circumstances of this exact situation we're discussing now, but for it to be, when it's a tear down.
A new house.
Dramatic in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a courtesy you can extend that no one may take you up on.
Right.
But it wouldn't hurt.
Well, one of the things we found in the past, I found, is that there are a lot of concerns and anxieties that neighbors have that turn out not to be warranted, but that comes out when you talk it with the builder and the architect and so on.
Plus, there's really a chance to talk about parking, of off-street parking.
That's the
of-
typical problem is
Right.
parking. Everyone's worried about all the contractors will coming in and take up all the parking.
Right, that is.
Thornapple will be a strange street to,
Yeah.
it's narrow and it's
yes.
one-sided parking and.
Yeah, no, I think that there's been a lot of advantage, and again, as long as people understand that you can't change the plan,
Right.
but what you can do is meet the people who are going to be involved in the construction
And let them
process.
know your concerns and anxieties.
And they have generally, I think those have been very positive meetings,
Yeah,
to
they
be
have
honest
been.
about it.
Yeah, they have been.
So I think
So-
it's good that we're, right?
Reinstituting those,
Yeah.
is that if
Yeah.
they in fact have been stopped.
Yeah, because we haven't had an ASA.
I
They
guess.
have been stopped by.
All right, so November-ish, if we actually get the plans, heads up.
Well, I'm trying to think, have we had new construction?
No.
Not in the
So
last
it isn't that we've stopped it, it has,
Well, we did
Tear
stop.
down and reconstruct since I've been here.
Yeah.
okay. Any other comments? We've got that one. Steve?
I want to make sure nobody else.
Lauren, did you have another?
Speaking already, please.
No,
go
no,
ahead.
if you have other ones, because I'm going to take a little while.
I have a quick one.
Yes, please.
Hi.
You have to stand up.
Alyssa Bean, Turner Lane. Just something I've noticed in the past, like I guess over the summer, is that so we're on a dead end street. When I don't know if it's the garbage or recycling or both. It seems like it's taking a lot longer. Like I see it's only one person working often. Like it's often a driver who's also doing collecting things. And so oftentimes, because it's a narrow street and it's dead end, like one time was actually when we were out together, my husband was caught for almost 20 minutes waiting because there's parked cars and then there was a lot of cars by. So I don't know what the story is with that, but I just wanted to.
No, I agree with you, because it appears to be the recycling one of where they're just using one person, and
It was also a big pickup. I know one time it was just one guy doing it, and it just.
on the heavy trash pickup.
Yeah. So
On the heavy trash.
the attention of the board.
Yeah, they have they have a new truck, like a new type of truck, and for some reason they decided that only one person should be on it. So I did email Waste Management, and they're coming in next week. So that was one of the things that was on my agenda to bring up with them.
And I think that's an important point that's being made, because I've gotten caught by them also. And if you're at the end of the street, as we are, I mean, you can't get out. I mean, you're stuck behind them, and it isn't a case of 2 minutes. Most of the time, they try to pull around so that you can get by. But I've also seen them. I've also seen them frustrated where they just
Don't do it anyway.
could care.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say just, Matt, since this contract was re-let before you got here, this was a question that we discussed about, putting a requirement in the contract to have at least 2 people in the trucks. It did not happen the last go-round, but if it's something that we need to revisit, there is flexibility in the contract, which Ron can give you the more specific details.
To require 2 people.
To terminate it and
Okay, Marty.
Hi, I'm Marty Langland, and I just bring greetings from your 2017 Elections Committee. Thank you for appointing us. We do have one open vacancy, so if you know anyone who'd like to work with us, we are a fun group. We try to stay out of trouble most of the time. And we'll be doing our first meeting in October. We don't have a date yet, we're still working that out, but we're looking forward to working with you, and we'll put the meeting date up with Beth. Thank you for being so wonderful, Matt. Thank you also for publicizing all the elections committees doing. And I do have one request about the annual survey. You might want to include a question about the election in the survey. We did a formal survey for the community on just the election procedures last year, you may remember, in the fall. But it seemed to work really well with the new.
So to inquire whether it went well?
Or do you have
people
specific
Any further suggestions?
suggestions on procedures?
Yeah, because we'd be open to that. People seem very happy with the election, but I'd still like to just put a little addendum.
Right.
Make it one question at a point.
That's a good point, thank you.
And thank you for appointing us. We're looking forward to having another.
Thank you for volunteering, and I'm hoping you might have.
We've been saying we need to have tea, so.
That's true.
Okay.
Round up.
I don't know where to come.
This is your best crew to recruit from.
just your life. Just your whole life.
Lauren, did you have something else you wanted to say?
I actually have two things.
Yes.
One, I'm curious.
If you would stand up, because I just want to be, part of it is that we're recording, and so we hear what you're saying.
Good practice. So again, I'm on Dead End Delfield. I'm Lauren, and my first question is there any kind of a process for the community to weigh in on what comes into the commercial strip? I have heard that this vacancy has already been filled, so I'm not. But in terms of thinking through, it seems that it would be a benefit to an incoming business to know that there was actually demand from the community around it for that said business, and just wondering if there's any kind of institutionalized practice for surveying the community about what kinds of services they might want.
The owners of the property are fairly independent and have no sort of, they're not terribly community-oriented. And so we have no way to influence, I mean, I suppose we can say, well, they do that a lot.
So, I mean, I guess I feel like there might be an opportunity for us as a consumer block.
Right.
To, even if we have to frame it in those kinds of terms, to at least offer our suggestions about the types of things that might create a successful business on this block.
Well, and I'm sure there is absolutely nothing to stop that, and we would provide you the name and address of the agent if you needed that.
Okay. And is it true that this vacancy has been filled by the Historical Society?
No, I can't imagine that.
Well,
the first one that came out was the Martin's Editions Historical Society,
Which doesn't exist.
which is a secret organization.
I did speak to them, and the Chevy Chase Historical Society did at least inquire about this space. I know a veterinary practice also inquired about the space, a woman's boutique, and
in there right now that used to be there. It's like
oh, so I didn't even realize that. So
Melissa, what'd you say? I didn't hear.
there was like a child's outfit laid out and some kind of chest, like little block toy chest or something.
Okay, so something to think about.
Okay.
I don't know if the gentleman had another piece of business before I continue. If
You can go ahead.
Yeah.
The other topic I wanted to raise, and I'm sure this is a bigger topic and something that I imagine has probably been discussed in the past, but I live on Dead End Delfield. I actually sent an email through Matt to the group, and I'm a mother of young children, and I am perpetually frightened by the lack of sidewalk on Thornapple, and the fact that my kids have no option to get to our commercial strip, to get to Shepherd Park. There's absolutely no way for a chunk of people who live in the community to travel safely from our neck of the woods, or for people to come to us. And Thornapple, as I'm sure you're aware, is used as a cut through by many people who are not neighborhood residents. It is a particularly treacherous street in some ways, and I am wondering if there is any way. I understand it's a big doing and requires people to give up some portion of what they feel to be part of their property, though it is not. However, I am very earnestly interested in this, and it's something that and I promise I'm not just coming here. This is the first one I've been able to come to, but I will come to all meetings. And this is also something that I've been caring about for many years now, as I've walked to the property, watching our house being done. So.
Do you know if there's any support by any of the surrounding folks?
I have been having many conversations with many people. There is certainly, the people that I have spoken to are certainly open.
Are they Delfield residents, or?
Many of the Dead End Delfield residents are all, would love it. Actually, someone said, "Oh, good luck with that." I tried that. My husband got hit by a car, and they didn't care. So
The old days.
okay, but,
I think
my point is, this is a danger to the point where people are getting hit by cars.
it was perhaps. When did you first send a note in? Because I walked the street one day, perhaps after your first comment on this, and there is room, as you say, in the village right away, most of the way for a sidewalk, but there are trees.
That's the problem.
Right in the middle that would have to, either a sidewalk would have to go around it, or the trees would have to come down, or something of that sort.
In my opinion,
but for most of the route, there is room. Yeah.
There is.
Yeah.
And even on one of the sides, it's not even fronting people's properties, it's actually the side of people's properties.
Yeah.
So I think there's a very persuasive case to be made that it's not even particularly, it's not their front walkway that they've planted, it's sort of the side that they never walk on.
And we, by the way, don't, Martin's Edition doesn't go all the way up Thornapple to Brookville Road. I mean, it ends just short of, as I I think on the
On one
plot,
side, it goes, we looked it up, right?
No, it does not
It doesn't
go.
connect to
on
Brookville?
either
does not.
side.
There's a map.
Can it get me to Chestnut?
Yeah, there's,
Yeah.
there's a map behind you.
And it helps past Chestnut actually, but not all the way.
It's the property
Yeah.
before,
And, I mean,
one house.
Right, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
So even, we wouldn't have the ability to put the sidewalk all the way through to Brookville. But who is
It's
the,
worth checking into.
but who is the, is that section 5 that has
Section
that?
5, yeah.
Yeah.
So we might be able to work with section 5 if,
I think they are.
boy, those are thorny problems
You
because
think,
people are quite protective.
Well, it's still, it's a public right of
that's
way.
Right, I know.
And I mean, the truth is, we had this discussion, it actually spurred me into action because we had a basketball net, and I got a message saying, that we don't feel comfortable because it forces people into the street, and
Yeah.
this is our right of way, and I thought, well, that's perfect.
Right.
Because I feel
So-
forced into the street all the time by the right of way.
Would Joe Cuttrell be the appropriate guy to look into that?
No, I think,
you don't think so?
I think it all rests with us.
Yeah,
to be
but I mean, in
truthful.
terms of alignments and finding the right area and everything?
That goes into our
This-
survey.
The trees and sidewalks in, I never know the name of the southern village, that way, is it the
Chevy
town?
Chase
or-
Village?
Is it the village? That the sidewalk actually goes around the trees.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is it
So
even-
clearly they were building it and the tree was there and it's a very old tree.
And these
Yeah.
are, and I would, certainly no byproduct of this in my mind is take down trees,
Right,
but.
right.
I
No,
mean,
but that, there are solutions
There
to
are
these
solutions,
things.
that's what I'm trying to
And
say.
but I think it takes a professional
Right.
eye
Well,
to look
somebody
at
has to come in
alignments,
and
the
do it.
feasibilities and so on.
And the right of way.
The right of way.
What do we actually have?
And whether retaining, I know there are retaining walls that come out, are they imposing on the right of way or not? I'm not sure. So it would require
A big survey.
a survey and I don't know how big, but a survey.
Yeah.
Well, at least we could do 2 blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, two blocks would make a big difference,
Yeah.
honestly.
Summit to Chestnut.
I mean, is it even something that Martin's Addition has to pay for? Or is it not something that we could, that like Montgomery County, I mean,
No, the county would not.
No, it would be something we would
We
pay
would do
They're
for.
all ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and the survey is something that we would request through Montgomery County then?
No, we would,
No,
we
we
would do
pay
it.
for that.
We would do
That's-
it.
that's
But it would be
gonna
I'm not sure if it'd be a full scale, a survey or a routing, checking the boundaries, the property lines, the feasibilities and so on.
So we have a survey right now that shows some information. One of the things that it does not show well, and it is something that Matt and Doug and Beth have been working on, is some of the measurements, like what would the right-of-way be in these areas, because the right-of-way varies greatly throughout the village. In some places, Steve Schmall did a survey a few years ago, but it's not respectfully, it's not a survey that we could use to build or not build based off of. We'd have to have a survey company come out. In some places, the right-of-way is a foot, 2 feet. In some places, it's 13 feet.
Yeah, 15 feet.
15 feet.
Yeah.
So, do I formally request that we consider the
Yeah, we
survey?
Yes.
So that it have been formally requested. Thanks, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Steve, we've been waiting with bated breath.
Oh, yes, you have. And you know what's coming up. I'm Steve Schmall. I live on Summit Avenue. One issue the council will take up this evening is the policy on what can be included in Martin's Addition. My basic position is well known to the council, and I will not restate it tonight. However, I want to address an aspect of the situation which I haven't commented on before. At its August meeting, the council enacted a policy regarding newsletter content, or more accurately stated, a return to an earlier policy but with qualifications. The qualifications were guidelines along the lines of one that I drafted for the council's consideration. I had done so in response to Richard Krajcik's comment that the absence of guidelines was among the reasons why the policy of barring all announcements not pertaining to official village business had been adopted. A majority of you voted in favor of including announcements about local activities of local nonprofits, provided they were submitted by a Martin's Addition resident and limited to 100 words. They were also to be placed in a separate section of the newsletter. As part of its decision, the council determined that legal counsel would be consulted on how to implement the policy. It is my understanding that legal counsel has responded and, using hypotheticals, indicated that implementing the policy would be fraught with difficulty. Were the council considering truly new policy, I would agree that legal counsel's opinion should be given great weight. But this is not the situation, and therefore I believe that legal counsel's opinion, while it shouldn't be ignored, should be given quite limited weight by the council. This is because the policy being considered is really not new. The policy was, albeit without officially endorsed limitations, in effect for quite a few years before it was changed last year to limit the newsletter to official village business. And please consider how the policy worked in the past. To my knowledge, only 3 nonprofit organizations ever sought to have announcements about their activities included in the newsletter. And to my knowledge, during the period the current exclusionary policy has been in effect, no other organizations have sought a policy reversal so their activities could be publicized. What legal counsel has presented are hypotheticals that, in light of what has happened in the past and the current situation, are extremely unlikely to arise in the future. My suggestion to you is this: proceed with the policy enacted at the August meeting, and in the extremely unlikely event that a situation were to arise akin to one of those posed by legal counsel, then and only then decide whether the policy can be fairly applied or if it's necessary to scrap it and again limit Martin's addition to official village business. As I will be soon moving, any decision the council makes will have little or no impact on me personally. But it will have an impact on 2 organizations that I currently represent. I believe that the government of the Village of Martin's Addition should foster a climate in which residents are encouraged to be involved in all aspects of our community, and returning to the previous policy with qualifications will do that. Thank you.
We'll miss you, Steve.
Yes. Steve, my concern is when you're saying what legal counsel has said, that's a letter confidential to the council.
I have only the gist of it that I was informed about. I do not have I'm not in possession of the letter. I do not know exactly what it says.
Right, and we asked for guidance, and that guidance is confidential to the council, just to be aware of that.
Right.
Because,
and it shall remain so, I'm
right,
sure.
Yes, it shall. Thanks. Okay, any questions on?
Well, you're going to have a discussion on that.
Eventually, we're going to get to that, right?
Where are you moving to, Steve?
San Diego.
Oh,
Well, I'm
be
sorry
missed.
if people did not know that. I thought everybody in the world knew about that at this point. In December, by the way. And we do have a contract for the sale of the property.
And so it's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It's all over with, but the shouting.
Settlement date.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, under
Yeah.
Chapter 12 of the Village Code, the council could issue an order rejecting the relocation and enjoining the small...
Nullifying the sale of the house.
I think it might be First Amendment.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Kathy Bishop. I live on Taylor Street. I just have one question about the agenda. And that is, I just wanted to know what the right-of-way license agreements, what is that about?
The right-of-way licensing agreements are, I'm sorry.
I don't want you to have to skip onto that. I just
Right. No, but it is that when residents plant or put things that are more than 12 inches high into the village right-of-way, they have to have a license to do that from the village.
Okay.
So that fences, walls, whatever, planting trees,
Pavements.
Trees.
yep.
Satellite can all be...
So the reason,
Forest.
yeah, the reason for it is that if there is work done in the right-of-way, Well,
The adjoining homeowner understands that it may be subject to removal in the future if
Right.
public need necessitates.
and the village won't restore it. I mean, you would, if you put something in it, the right-of-way, and it has to be taken down, it is your responsibility, not the village's. Okay. Anything else? We're chugging on.
Okay.
Action on the minutes of August 18th. Those were approved by email. Are there any other, would somebody just move to adopt them now in practice?
I move to adopt.
Susan, second.
I'll second.
Katya, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Clarifying code 7403 and 7404. This is, in fact, the very thing we're talking about. This last comment is on licensing for, no?
No.
It's
Was
on
this-
nonconformities.
Is this the-
Developmental
Oh, God, yes, okay. I keep forgetting, okay, go. I can't, I thought we're moving on.
Sure. So in the code, currently, there are two provisions governing what you can do with a developmental nonconformity under different situations. A developmental nonconformity is basically a building or structure that was lawful when erected, but no longer conforms to the code because of a change in the code. The two provisions apply in different situations. One applies when the structure is lost to a casualty event, when it burns down. And the other applies to all other situations. So when the Land Use Task Force recommended our new building regulations, the initial recommendation was to only allow the replacement of nonconformities that were lost to a casualty event, and to allow them to be replaced only if no dimension was enlarged. And the legislative history reflects that the council thought that that was a little too strict, and so relaxed that provision to state you can rebuild your house after a fire as long as you're not increasing any encroachment into the setbacks, the height of the building, or the overall footprint. So if your non-conforming house builds down, you don't have to build the exact same house. You can build it a little different, but you can't create a greater non-conformity. And also, the council rejected the general notion that all nonconformities should be disallowed to be replaced. Ordinarily, if you adopt a new regulation, the anticipation is over time, all buildings will be rebuilt in compliance with the new regulations. But we have a provision that provides some relief to homeowners that have existing nonconformities. And we say those are going to be grandfathered as long as when you do modify them or alter them, you're not altering them beyond any existing dimension. So unlike the provision regarding casualties, which limits the word dimension to setbacks, height, and footprint, the other provision that deals with alteration of any nonconformity, not just after a fire, just uses the word dimension. And in the past, that's interpreted to mean a three-dimensional boundary. So if you picture a house, it has three dimensions, not just two dimensions like footprint or height, but three dimensions. And so you can alter that existing nonconformity, but you can't extend any wall, any building element outside of that existing three-dimensional box.
Or change roof lines. So if the roof line used to be pitched, you can't
Make it square.
raise things and square it off on the sides under the same height.
So we had a recent building application where those two provisions weren't clear to the applicant thought because we define dimension in one provision to only mean setbacks, height, and footprint, that should be the same interpretation of the other provision. And the legislative history reflects the opposite, but the council has the opportunity now to decide, do we need to clarify the code?
Right.
Is there something unclear that should be made more clear? And also, you can take this opportunity to decide, is that still the construction that you want, or do you want a different construction?
Right. I saw it as two possibilities. One, we could adopt the the three constraints in the casualty rebuilding: footprint, height, total height, and setbacks. That would be a little bit relaxation of a present interpretation, or clarify the phrase as you interpret it, saying that it may not be enlarged beyond any dimension. And I think just putting in the any would clarify it. So right now, because one paragraph immediately follows the other paragraph, this is where the misinterpretation, or the potential for misinterpretation occurs. And this apparently has in the past. You had supplied similar clarifications to previous building administrators where this issue had come up. So I think it does need clarification. So do we want to have the easier provision of the if there's a fire or some other major casualty, or do we want to have the strict provision as is currently in the code? I'm willing to go with either. I don't have a particular
Well, the question would be,
for either.
the height would still matter, but if you've got auxiliary building and you want to raise the roof to create a second story, that the strict language would
not
prohibit
allow it.
doing
Right.
that if that building was non-compliant.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. Yes. It could be. It doesn't have to be an auxiliary building. It could be the main
Right.
building. So you can't change a, what do you call
You
this kind
can't
of a
increase
roof?
the volume of the building.
Yeah, you can't change the volume. You can't change the outline.
Cable.
What can you do?
You can build within the current outline of the building, or smaller.
Which would include like putting in electrical or...
Yeah, you can do that. Anything on the inside.
Or changing the siding, if you want to, or change siding to bricks as long as you're not exceeding the existing dimensions.
In the current case, a roof line went from being a, what do you call
Gable?
this? A gable roof to more of a square roof. So the height did not change. In fact, the height came down a bit, but the volume and shape of the building changed. And
Height in the middle did not.
you're right, height in the middle did not
on the
increase. In fact, there was
sides.
something on the top that actually came off, made it a little bit shorter. And reading the constraints as described for a rebuild after fire, that would have been allowed. But after looking at the next paragraph in strict interpretation, would not have been allowed. So
And this applies strictly to buildings that are
Non-conforming.
non-conforming. So that means they're already into the setback more than what is now allowed under the code.
Right, or too tall.
Or too tall, right. So we're not talking about buildings that are compliant. We're only talking about those that are out of compliance.
So, anyone have any
Well, I would keep
views?
the stricter view.
You want the stricter?
I would, yeah,
I have no objection to the stricter.
just because I think it opens us up to two-story, that aren't intended to be
Right.
two stories.
Yeah.
And I think if I were a neighbor and suddenly the garage next door became a two-story garage, I wouldn't be happy about it.
Brad,
I
is
want to
it,
make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying the stricter interpretation for the rebuilding after natural disaster
remains?
and, well, no, I think it's
Oh, are you
even
saying
stronger.
No,
after
I'm-
the disaster?
No, I'm only talking
Only the
about
nonconformity,
the nonconformity.
the 7404.
Do you want them to have the same rule, or do you want
No.
them to have different rules?
Different rules. He's saying different rules.
You're
A
saying,
looser rule for rebuilding after a fire.
Right.
Stricter rules for maintenance or what? You're
trying to figure out what, I mean, if, let's just say a garage with a gabled roof got taken down by a tree.
Yeah,
Then we say to the resident, you can rebuild it as long as it's within the same footprint.
right, that
and
would go
height.
under,
So they could change the function
Yeah.
of that
yes,
and turn it into a
right.
living space, let's say.
We could apply the strict to both.
But if a garage, if a resident said, I want to change my garage into a living space in a developmental sense,
They could.
we would be saying no.
Right. So
You'd have to burn it down
Right,
first.
burn it down.
If I might
I just know
interject
that
just-
loud that I was thinking that.
Not
Yeah,
natural.
exactly.
Wait,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Would part of it, I'm wondering if it would it be harder to enforce that in a building that got destroyed because you would only have the plans of it which told the building height and the footprint of it. So,
If there were even plans.
well,
of that.
but that might be what
What drove the original?
right that's all we really have.
Yeah.
I would,
What your preference
I would want the same rules
for both?
for both.
That makes sense.
And so do you want the looser rules for
Or the
both?
tighter?
I think if it's a let's couch it this way. I believe that the goal of the land use task force and the building code is that the non-conforming things be able to be repaired, but not made something different.
Right, right.
So I would say the stricter interpretation, if we're staying with that intent of the code, would be what would apply.
I would accept that. We haven't heard any good reason why it was softened to begin with, loosened to begin with.
Because,
Go ahead.
so you start with the general proposition that in 2009, we were concerned with mansionization. We were dealing with Montgomery County building codes mostly, written in the 1950s in a one-size-fits-all fashion at a time when houses were built much smaller. And so we found ourselves in a situation where we're regulating basically only setbacks, and houses are being built much larger. And we couldn't rely on the county one-size-fits-all. So the Land Use Task Force put together a package of recommended regulations to address the potential impact. And there's the general proposition in those regulations is that we believe these setbacks, these height restrictions, are the ones that are appropriate. So even non-conforming buildings ought to be brought into conformance one day if they're ever replaced. It was a very contentious process. Some folks didn't want any change. And so the council was sensitive to the fact that there were two sides of the debate and sought to find a middle ground. And I think as part of that process, the council recognized we ought to give some relief to those folks that have existing nonconformities. If someone loses their house to a fire, maybe we don't need them to build the exact same house, but we shouldn't increase the impact on their neighbor. So they can rebuild a different house as long as it's no closer to the side lot line than the prior house was. And maybe we weren't so concerned that all nonconformities should disappear over time, but just not be expanded. And so we put in the second provision that says, nonconformities can be altered, but you can only alter them within the existing three-dimensional boundaries, so you're not increasing the impact on your neighbors by enlarging a nonconformity.
So is the difference between section 7403 for rebuilding, you would say, let's use a house for example, it's a non-conforming house. The footprint can be the same, it can't be any bigger, it can be, or cannot encroach any more. It can't
be any bigger.
It can't,
Can't change.
well, but it could go further back,
But-
it could encroach.
Right, you can, if you have an articulation in the front, you could move it to the
Right.
back instead,
Right.
but just as long as you're not increasing the overall footprint.
So so the setback, you can't go any further into the setback,
Right.
but you also can't go any further on the other side, even though there is room in the setback.
No, you could. Here's something,
that's
I
not
hadn't
what
heard
I'm
that.
hearing.
You can move the footprint around the property as long as you don't encroach anymore into the setback.
Exactly, as long as you don't increase the encroachment. And
Right.
it's only an encroachment if it violates the existing setback. So
Right.
if you do have room on the other side,
You can move the
you
whole
can move
footprint
closer
over.
to the other side up to the 8-foot setback line.
Yeah.
And make the building bigger.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
No, you can't increase
But you also have to stay within the
footprint.
footprint limitations.
So here's your footprint. You
Right.
can shift it around on the property,
Okay.
but you can't encroach any further into a setback.
Right, and you
Nor can you
can't,
expand it.
nor can you expand
You can't
it.
expand it.
You cannot.
No, right, you cannot expand it. You have to keep that footprint.
Correct.
You can't go beyond that footprint
Correct.
and height.
So to me, that doesn't, in a way, that doesn't accommodate concerns of residents. Does our building administrator have a useful example?
But it's the argument of not building the same house, right?
But you
So
couldn't build, say your house was a square
Yeah, but
and
now
encroached on one side, you can't make it a rectangle.
you can't, but the actual house itself could have a different design.
Right, that's what
The
it
rooms
says.
could
Style.
be,
Square,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you couldn't make it, you could not make it.
the rooms inside can be different.
Yeah,
Correct.
and you can shift it onto the property.
I get the footprint and that it
Yeah.
stays.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, do we make that? We could make them both strict.
What are you thinking?
Either. I mean, I see arguments for both. And I like the idea of eventually trying to bring things back into conformity and not allowing a natural disaster to turn into a windfall for someone who doesn't like their
Who wants to-
existing house.
Yeah.
And I did use that term, windfall.
Yeah.
But it does seem like it could be,
It could, yeah.
fortuitous
Yeah.
if somebody really hates their house.
Doug,
And
do you
so
have
do you
any
think
comment?
we should keep the both?
Well, let's hear, does Doug have a point of view?
No.
I'm not done yet with Susan
Okay.
do you believe that they should be kept the same? Both definitions should be kept the same? In other words, should we be
Yeah.
using the stricter rule for it across the board?
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Tiffany, you look doubtful about all of
Katya,
it.
Doubtful about regulations in general.
Katya,
So I think I agree with Arthur that if we are to keep the two provisions the same way, that adding the word "any" would clarify things. I'm also open to just making them both stricter, or maybe just using one provision in that case.
one definition.
One definition.
Okay.
Or keeping it the way that it is. I don't want to make one of them looser.
Right. Tiffany,
No.
you seem to be all over.
I think I'm not all over the place. I think that, the code apparently made a distinction between rebuilding after natural disaster and developmental nonconformity. But I don't know that the actual rebuilding after natural disaster helps residents in the way it might have been intended
Right.
to help them. And I would rather have the code be clear for everyone's future use. And I'm also curious what our building administrator thinks of this.
Yeah, he has no views.
Do you,
Nothing yet.
Still no use.
okay,
Where you are.
well,
The only suggestion I would make maybe is include the word volume because of that roof issue.
Well, any
As part
dimension
of-
would cover that. You can't enlarge any dimension.
But you'd have to add the word volume for,
Yeah.
in section 7403 as well,
Yeah.
correct? Because right now we're talking about height, we're talking about footprint. We don't talk about volume. So
Right.
previous building height.
Right. As written, you can enlarge the volume.
I know that you want to make comments, and we really tried to save that for the front and the end of the meeting.
Mine might help you,
Okay,
because our house did burn to the ground. And it wasn't a windfall. It was not fortuitous. I don't think it ever is.
No,
But
I'm
anyway,
sure.
and it was all perfectly clear. So we built on the existing footprint. There were no questions. So I just thought that would help you.
Wait, no, but
It was clear.
Do you recall whether the house that burned was conforming to all the requirements, or was it so-called non-conforming?
I believe so.
So it was already conforming, so then it's not, see, that's not an issue if it's all already within all the codes and setbacks.
so,
I guess I'm just saying we
Right.
knew that we had to build on the existing footprint.
Okay, okay.
And,
Was it?
And you built a very nice house.
oh, thanks.
and so we need a motion that says that we need, ask Ron to draft the code so that both pieces are in alignment.
And
they're
in the strict
in the strict sense.
In the strict sense.
So I think the chairman's saying that we were asking for an amendment to the code that would then go through the process of being introduced and have full and open
Yeah.
Right,
resident comment.
right. In order to correct the language so that there isn't that sort of unclarity in the future.
Okay, so
Both paragraphs
for
strict.
the casual events will also be limited to replacement within the existing three-dimensional boundaries.
Yes,
Okay.
okay. Do we need a motion, or is that it?
Just instruct.
Okay.
Okay.
Moving on to, the Martin's Edition newsletter contents. I think that the information that has come to us puts us, I think we're doing fine the way we are. Our current practice of limiting it to the Village of Martin's Editions news, I think that the listserv continues to serve well for the other notes. And I think like this week I saw where we've put out the obituary of a resident who has been here for some time, which I think is a way of also helping residents stay in touch.
I thought we had agreed that we were going to open it up. Last meeting.
All pending guidance from council about how to implement.
Right. Say that
There was
again?
an agreement in the last meeting, yes. The majority members of the council did want to open it up.
Pending.
We had a discussion about how would we do that and what would council's recommendation be. And then council wrote, the attorney wrote, he provided his legal counsel. So that's where we are. Which, here, if you want to,
Did I see that?
Yes.
can I get?
Well, I can't speak for you.
Oh, I am on the list, okay.
So, I guess, in as much as there we are, again, what do you want to do? Open it up?
I voted last time to open it up.
Okay, and you
Yeah, and I
weren't changed
still-
with the,
Well, there was a draft that came around that was redlined and had changed language. Who was that
Yes.
from?
Beth, she did.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
when
thought-
she sent
okay.
that draft around was the first, since Ron wasn't at our last meeting,
Oh.
he provided his counsel. So that is now just a part of the consideration of the village council and whether or not that impacts.
Oh,
Do we
okay.
And you're
finalize the
saying-
draft or go forward?
And you're saying that we're fine?
I kind of like Beth's changes. But, okay, but the issues that arise from this are what?
The village newsletter could become a public forum. If you allow some people to post, you got to make sure that you're not unconstitutionally denying other people the same opportunity. So any guidelines that you adopt have to be narrowly tailored to be content neutral and not to discriminate. And
So would that put us in a position of for-profits who wanted to post could post?
well,
No, if we,
Or no? Well,
commercial speech enjoys much less protection. I'm not that concerned with opening up our newsletter to commercial speech, but I think the real goal is that we want folks to be able to publish events that are of interest to village residents, nearby events and whatnot, but it may be difficult to draw the line here and there. On the other hand, when I wrote the email, I was thinking about Gene Sperling in particular beating me over the head and saying the same thing that Steve Schmall said. Like, give me a break, Ron. We've been doing this for so many years. It's not really a risk. And that may be true. It's just my job as the attorney to point out what I have to point out, even though the risk may be minimal.
Okay.
so at a minimum, there would have to be some edits made to the draft.
Yeah,
Beth had-
I suggested a general preamble to perhaps make it a little easier to say no to folks.
okay.
Space constraints
Right.
would not be a reason that we could use, or the village manager could use.
Yeah, we don't want to suggest that space constraints is the only reason
Right,
we would
okay.
turn folks away.
Right.
So,
So is this just adopting a policy?
Yes. If you want to be that formal, then I would suggest you adopt it as a policy just like you do other policies, because we've adopted a format for that just so they can all be filed in the same place. You could also not adopt a formal policy, but just include in the minutes that this is the plan.
Okay. And are you comfortable with this, which is
no,
proposed as the
you're
plan?
suggesting
No.
some additions to Beth's draft.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, I suggested an alteration of the preamble.
Okay.
But that was mostly it.
Okay.
So if I think there's 3 members of the council, and I don't know if you're where you are,
Right.
ready to go forward, understanding that some of Ron's concerns could be addressed by
Yeah.
minimal changes to
Right.
this,
Yeah.
and then it could be either a policy that we post, which I would advocate
Yeah, I would too.
for, so people
Right.
just know, and as well as instruction to the staff that here's what it's going to be.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And that means that the newsletter would be opened
Yeah.
to other organizations. Okay.
Can I ask an inquiry just about practicality of it? Since obviously I don't have the benefit at this point of knowing what the new policy is, but may be affected by it in the brief time I'm here, it would be very helpful to have the guidelines as
Soon as possible.
soon as possible.
Right, and they have to be reviewed by, I mean, we still, there is some preamble missing here, so we can't,
So they're not in effect yet.
no. Okay,
Good. Moving on.
Lauren, I mean, as I say, we're trying not to interrupt the,
I'll add it to the comments at the end.
Okay. So, established building line, just when I think we've handled. Doug.
Use the easiest. Just wanted to make it clear from the beginning that the established building line is one section of the code, and the projections are another section, and they're not related. They're related, but they're not tied together. What I've created here, and you've got it in your booklets, is a hypothetical situation. I took the actual plans that AMT gave us and erased all the old buildings and created new buildings.
I was wondering whether this was your invention or it was actual. Okay.
And what I did was, and the EBL is required the EBL is established building line. When a new house is installed or constructed or something is added to another, we have to determine the established building line by the code. And in order to do that, you have to take this, the red one here is a sample, the example. You had to go 300 feet each direction from this property line and 300 feet from that property line and calculate the front setbacks and then average those 12 lots. It's interesting to note that in the Village of Martin addition, because of the small lots, there's 12 lots here. If you go into Montgomery County, where the lots are 100 foot wide, you're only dealing with 6, and it's a big difference when you're averaging and taking 12 versus 6. So what I did was, the yellow here is 25-foot setback from the street, and there's 8 of those. And then I assumed, okay, there's going to be 4 houses on the street, and they have a 40-foot setback. And when you calculate the EBL off of that, you get an EBL of 30 feet back, which is halfway between these two. But what that means is the sample house that's 25 feet back from the street with an EBL of 30 feet, and you take 9 feet of projection of the porch into the EBL, they can have a 4-foot porch. But this house over here, that's 40 feet back, can have a 19-foot porch, and it's brand new. And that, to me, didn't seem fair. So that's why I brought it up. But Councilmember Alexander had suggested at one time that we take a 20-foot, nothing can be closer to the street than 20 feet. That would allow this porch to be 20 feet because it's a 40-foot setback. So we've gone the other way, I think, in that situation. Smaller setbacks, it might work fine. I did meet with Lynn, and I can't pronounce her last name.
Ayarola.
Yeah, that's it. We had a meeting here. She had some ideas. She was planning on attending, but she called me at 4 o'clock and apologized, said she couldn't make it. But she basically said, leave it like it is. She didn't see any changes.
And for those who don't know, she is an architect who served on the Land Use Task Force, and at the time that the codes were done. But the issue is because it is the front porch issue, as I recall.
Well, my recommendation was to adopt the code, the county's code, which exempts existing houses from the EBL calculation. But then I also suggested that you might look at the front porch setback, because with the house 25 feet from the street, and you can have a 9-foot porch, that's 16 feet from the right-of-way. And I said, is that something you all wanted to do? Or did you want to review that and maybe change it? And that's where we ended up, I think, last meeting.
Right.
Did you have a percentage also at one point?
One recommendation was take 20, my recommendation, just to throw it out there, was take 20% of the setback. So if you have a 25-foot setback, you can have a 5-foot porch. If you have a 40-foot setback, you can have an 8-foot porch. Just as some way of, for me and Matt, to calculate and say, okay, this is acceptable or not, because it's really, it's just some way of administering it.
In terms of the we're not supposed to talk about aesthetics, but what's the appropriate phrase we can use in terms of maintaining community
Sightlines,
sightlines?
vista, streetscape.
Yes.
Very good.
Is there a, what are the issues there?
Well, Lynn's perspective
Yeah.
was that when you have houses set back and porches, different offsets up and down the street,
Yeah.
it creates character. If everything is set back exact distance from the street, it gives you tunnel vision. So she liked the idea of having some porches up, some porches back.
Oh, so she likes variability.
Yes.
Uh-huh,
And she especially liked that in the smaller communities because every street's different.
right.
This is the first time, thank you very much for someone who's very visual. This is very helpful to have as a depiction. It's interesting to me to hear the difference between Montgomery County and us. I mean, how many properties did you say?
Well, given this,
Montgomery
his
County
lots.
has an R60 zone inside the Beltway. But outside the Beltway, pretty much everything is R200. That's a typical new subdivision size, which is usually 100 foot wide, 200 foot deep.
So would we be able to maintain character, sightline, whatever, if we perhaps shrunk the 300 feet
Well, you
and did
could.
it based on properties?
You could say 4 houses each direction or 3 houses or whatever, yeah.
Does that, you said that makes a difference. How, I know you bring them more into an average or less, fewer into an average,
It
but,
could make a difference.
Yeah.
Remember when we did the house at 3505
yeah,
of Raymond, where this was the house and this house way over here was setting back here.
Oh, yeah.
Which totally messed up the calculations. But if you only go 3 or 4 houses each way, you might have that situation, but again, then you might not. But right now we're dealing with 12 houses versus,
right,
that's a lot of impact.
right. And so you're
It
saying,
averages out because there's 12 houses too.
Yes.
so I didn't catch it.
It averages out, right? There's 12
Yeah, it averages out.
Unless you have an aberration.
Right.
But it averages out, but it increases the probability of an outlier.
But say if
Yeah.
we were to change it to 3 houses in
Yeah.
each direction.
Then you could really have
and
an
you're right
outlier.
next to this house.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
Yeah,
What about something like throwing out the closest and the farthest? Like
oh, yeah, right.
something like that.
That's interesting.
The highest and the lowest.
Yeah, highest and the lowest.
Then like if you have somebody that's way back
Right.
or way
Yeah.
forward, it's sort of thrown out.
I kind of like that.
I'm just sort of.
I do that all the time. What's that?
Sorry, why are we changing? I think I keep being confused. Why are we changing?
I wasn't recommending changing it, I was just pointing out the difference between an R60 and R200. I wasn't suggesting a change.
Okay.
But
But you were
there
suggesting
were,
a change for the EBL for porches?
Yes.
Yes.
But not the 300 foot dimension.
300 foot dimension was my question that I learned tonight.
right, okay.
The EBL issue has been outstanding for 6 years.
this is the EBL issue, not the porch issue.
They're connected.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know they're, right.
But
So-
this is an EBL sketch, but it does impact, the EBL does impact the porch.
Right.
So,
Get it.
So, Doug, so
But-
in your example, if you were to use the percentage on that, instead of having a 4-foot porch, which isn't really usable, if a person was squeezed into the 4-foot porch, would your percentage give you a little bit bigger porch?
Be a 5-foot porch.
5-foot porch.
And Lynn did say, by the way, because she is an architect,
Yeah.
she said a 3-foot, 4-foot porch is very unsafe.
Yeah.
Because when you open the door, you
Well,
step back and you step off the step.
Right, right. So so your percentage would open up, so would that mean that the minimum porch width would be 5 feet?
Not necessarily.
Well, there are houses that are, I think, less than 25 feet in the village, but yes, the typical one of 25 foot.
25 feet. So-
If you take 20%.
So if you're really up close to the
Like our
front
last
line,
variance hearing.
yeah, and you want to put a porch in, you're out of luck. Yeah, like our house. Yeah, I was just talking about that. Okay. Okay. So we have 2 issues. One is to adopt the county provision that this only applies, that the EBL only applies to new construction. We've already kind of accepted that as an idea, but we haven't acted on it. And the second, do we change the projection calculation?
And if we don't
Right.
make any changes, then if a house is 3504, can it build a porch at all? If we do not make any changes regarding the EBL, the house that
And
is highlighted in
projections.
red. Right, if we don't make any changes to the code. This house that's in red here, the sample house, would it be able to build a porch?
4-foot porch.
A 4-foot?
Yeah.
The one that's on there?
The run that you're going to fall off of when you open the door,
But it's probably going to generate...
Without a variance.
without a variance.
Right.
And
Right.
it's going to generate more variances, probably.
Yeah.
But that's where we are right now.
Yep.
Yeah, that's where we are now.
Yeah,
And every single, I mean, at least all the variance hearings I can remember have been
those projections.
it's the porch or the stairs to get
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
Every single one.
So by going to a percentage, it would open it up a bit, would make it a little less tight.
If you use 20%.
If we use
You just use
20%.
anything.
Yeah.
So 3504 though on yours would have would allow a 9-foot porch, but the thing that you were pointing out is their setback it would be 30 feet, right?
Which one is that? Which
3504 would be the
Sample
red
house.
one.
There's
The
no
red
35.
house.
They would
The
have
red.
an
Up there, right, yeah.
There would be a 4-foot porch here and a 19-foot porch here.
Which one would have the four?
All of the yellow ones could have a 4-foot porch.
And if you were to use the percentages, it would be a 5-foot porch.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
And the blue ones can have a 19-foot porch.
Okay.
And if there's a house that's non-conforming and it's 20 feet from the street, and we don't change anything, is it able to have a 4-foot porch today?
All depends on what's in the neighborhood. Have to calculate the EBL and determine what the... So I have to calculate the setbacks and then determine what the EBL is. It's possible, it could not.
Okay.
Every lot's different because of the neighbors.
Right. So, two issues, adopt the county interpretation that the EBL only applies for new construction. I think we're all clear on that. We all accept that, don't we?
I wasn't ready to go there.
Oh, okay.
No.
I was not either.
Yeah. Were you ready to go there?
I think I might be.
That, what it means is that the only reason you'd calculate the EBL is for new construction.
Yeah.
Which I think I would be there, which is kind of contradictory to what we talked about earlier, having consistency for old versus new. If we were to get rid of the EBL for the old, it almost seems to me like that would be an enticement for keeping some of the older construction. Because they might be able to make some of the modifications.
Thank you, Steve.
We'll see. Thank you.
So today the EBL applies not for new construction, but for any modification, is that right?
Yeah.
And
Any modification to the front.
And
the
new
front.
construction, as well as
new construction.
As well as new.
Right. So,
He's talking about getting rid of the EBL for non-conforming, or for existing.
In addition to an existing house, it would only apply to a demo and a reconstruct,
Right.
which is the way the county interprets it.
okay. And we now interpret that if you're doing a remodeling,
Or if you're also new construction.
Applies to anybody, anything, all times,
Right.
right now, here in Martin's Mission.
yeah.
Right.
And what the proposed relaxation of the code would be that for existing non-conforming structures,
Yeah.
that we would not have them have to comply with the EBL.
Yeah.
But
If they were
anything that we do-
doing what? If they couldn't, you can't build into the, you can't encroach in, if you're non-conforming.
That's the second subject subject. The second subject is what encroachment, when, how, and why. The first question is EVL, yes, no.
But I don't know how you so easily separate those. I mean, I apparently don't get it, but it's...
I see what the issue is, that if you have an existing house that's non-conforming, suppose you built, this house was built in 1930.
Right.
And in the meantime, there's all these new houses that are set further back.
Right.
And you used to conform, and this is what Doug has described. You used to conform when it was originally built. New houses are set further back. All of a sudden, you're now non-conforming. If you wanted to put a porch on that, you wouldn't be allowed to today.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
you're conforming, but you can't add a porch. It's still
Okay.
conforming because it's a 25-foot setback. So it's not a non-conforming use.
He said
Oh,
20 feet.
But
Okay, no, the EBL. I'm saying you used to be within the EBL.
Of the houses that used to be
That used to
there.
be there.
Yes.
Now all the houses are farther back, and the EBL for that block
Has creeped back.
has creeped back.
Yes.
So now you're a non-conforming EBL. Is that
Right.
correct? Okay. And now if you wanted to do something, what would you now be prohibited from doing?
Anything.
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 Yeah. The EBL has moved back.
Right.
So right now, an unenclosed porch can project 9 feet beyond the setback. So let's say that
Yeah.
the EBL has creeped back 9 feet.
Right.
So that means you don't get any porch without a variance.
You don't get a bay window
Right.
without a variance.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
And that was the argument for going to the county code, only in a new construction, where you're starting over.
Projections includes bay windows, porches and steps, not just a porch.
Okay.
Stairways, breezeways, stoops. There's a whole list of projections. But the biggest one seems to be
Porches. Right. But we've had issues with front steps.
well, they're combined. It's porch and step.
Yeah.
Or
It
stoop
is
and
quite
step.
unusual for a house not to have front steps, though.
Yes.
And I get that we actually saw it once, but
Yes.
I doubt that would come up much more often.
Yeah, and most variances are, we have a front stoop that has no covering to protect us from the elements, therefore we want to build a modest porch
Well,
and
we-
replace the stoop.
We had one on the north end that was steps to get down from a door. I think that was
So,
one a lot.
a person can still apply for a variance under these conditions, but it's both costly and it's an added burden to do any of this.
Correct.
Okay, so is there a motion?
Can I give you one more thought?
Yes,
Yeah.
no, please, no.
Yeah, go ahead.
I already am
So yeah,
a C.
at the risk of drawing the ire of architects,
Yeah.
so in my opinion, from the legal perspective,
Yeah.
the purpose of the established building line setback is actually to create uniformity of setbacks.
Right.
It's to eliminate variation, so that someone sitting on their porch on any of these lots has the ability to look up and down the street and see open air and enjoy the streetscape. If their neighbor has a porch that's farther into the setback than them, then they're looking at their neighbor's porch instead of looking up and down the street. So if you're adopting a percentage, you would have less uniformity potentially on the street.
And you're saying less visual openness.
Well, see, this is where where it inevitably creeps into aesthetics.
If I may just say, it seems like we're going in circles. Should we just vote and
Yeah.
move on?
Okay, but tell us what you want to vote on,
The two things that Arthur described.
which are,
Go to the county code
Just for new
new construction. The EBL is recalculated just for new construction. And the second is, do we want to say something about projections?
Allowing encroachment
Right.
Projections.
into the setback.
Right. And if we go to the county, calculating EBL only for new construction, the effect on our village would be,
Well, the benefit would be, you would address Doug's concern. Folks that want to add a porch onto an existing house wouldn't have to contend with the EBL.
But they'd still have to comply with whatever we,
They would still
Set
get
as
9 feet into the 25-foot minimum.
unless we change it to a
Right,
something else.
right.
Yeah. I think that makes sense to go with the county version.
to you?
Yeah, I probably would like the percentage calculation
And the percent,
rather
okay.
than the 9 feet.
So
Percentage.
yes, we adopt the counties
And Doug's percentage.
and the 20%.
Well, we instruct our lawyer to
Prepare.
Prepare
an
the
amendment
code
to the
changes.
code
Yeah.
that would, so we have to vote on it later.
Right, we can't vote on it today.
I'm against both.
You are against our adopting the county code, which is only that we would look at new construction for setback. And you are also against using percentages for
I
front
want to leave it the
porches.
way that it's in the code today.
Okay.
And the
It's
reason
her
is...
week, it's her month to be the contrarian.
No, but why? No, let's hear
I had it
why.
last month.
Well, this will come up again, but
Well,
let's hear
because
it
my
now.
concern is with
Yeah.
encroachment into the 25-foot setback.
Uh-huh.
So
And
I
you're
feel
con-
like if we change
Yeah.
the EBL,
Yeah.
and even if we allowed for the percentages, then the encroachment into that space between the house and the street would statistically be smaller.
It could be.
It would allow bigger porches and more encroachment into the setback.
Can
and I
we
don't
use
like
the
that.
Turner Lane variance hearing as an example? Do you remember that well enough? Did you off the top of your head?
Say that again.
Turner Lane variance hearing?
Still can't hear you.
The Turner Lane variance hearing that we did?
Yes.
How far back was that house from the? It was a non-conform, it fits this discussion. It was a non-conforming structure that was impacted by the EBL and therefore could not add steps or porch, anything.
But that was an exception. I mean, most houses do have some kind of steps already built in.
No, but so say it was that house and they had steps and they wanted to put a stoop or like whatever it was. They still would have had to have gone through
Yes.
the variance process.
EBL on that lot would not allow a
Anything.
porch. That's why they had to come in for the variance.
But if we removed the EBL requirement for non-conforming existing structures and said 20%, I think is what you guys talked about, what would that house have looked like in the end?
I don't know.
It could have been allowed, possibly have been
But
allowed.
I think I'm guessing that they would have had a 4-foot porch instead of a 3-foot
think it was 3.
porch.
Yeah.
What we gave them as a variance was 3, but I'm guessing.
But I think that we gave them that variance because if that calculation was used, it would be 3. There was some kind of reasoning to it.
It was just
And as I recall, we had a number of residents who came in saying, this is going to be so much better than what's there now.
And
Improvements.
some variances will happen. This is normal. Right?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of houses in the neighborhood. And in some instances, that may be the appropriate route.
Okay.
Should not be-
So, okay, one person is saying, don't go ahead. And
Just to clarify, if we were to adopt the 20%, and there's a 25-foot setback, currently, there could be a 9-foot porch
Not
extending.
necessarily.
Well,
under the current code, there could be a
under the-
9-foot
under the
porch,
current
correct?
code,
Yes.
there can
Under
be.
certain circumstances, yes. So if the EBL allows it, there could be a 9-foot porch.
If all the houses on the same street were 25 feet back from the street, you could have a 9-foot porch on a 25-foot setback house.
But if we were to replace it with a 20%, then it could be 9 feet into the,
It'd be 5 feet.
5 feet instead of 9.
Okay. Yeah, I
So
see
it
that
could
point.
be-
So yes.
Smaller.
But I like the smaller, less sensitive.
Thing is that the EBL could move forward as well. I mean, we use the example
But
of
not
everyone
beyond
moving
25
back.
feet.
No, not
It's
beyond
25 is the
the,
minimum.
not beyond the
That's kind of, it's an
setback.
interesting point, which she
Yeah,
just said, you
yes.
flip it
I
around.
hear that, yes.
The percentage is actually, in the worst case scenario, the percentage is a smaller
That's right.
yet usable, according to the architect's porch.
You know, this whole thing gets into, we can't help but get into aesthetics when we talk
So,
about all this.
Can we, just in
Yeah.
order to her point of,
And we're not supposed to talk about
Wait,
it.
let me,
don't do it.
Try one more time.
come on.
Yeah. We'll vote on this. Write it up, we'll introduce it, we'll vote.
That's fine.
Well, let me just make sure this isn't an unintended consequence.
Okay.
All right, so I'm just trying to think about what this might look like in practice. All right, let's say we have the 3 houses, one's at the 40, one's at 25, one's at 35. They can each construct a porch that's 20% of the existing distance, right? That's the proposal. So the guy that's on the 35-foot lot.
Depending on whether or not the EBL applies.
Well, we're getting rid of the EBL now. These are all existing houses.
Okay.
This is, under the proposal. So the existing guy on the 35 can have the 7-foot porch, meaning he's going to have a resulting actual setback between the porch and the street of 28 feet. So he's at 28 feet. His neighbor, the gal with the 25-foot actual setback, can have a 5-foot porch, and she's going to be at 20. So we're telling the guy on 35, your porch can only be 7 feet. So when you're sitting on your porch, you're going to have to look at your neighbor's porch, and you're not going to be able to look down the
But
street.
isn't he already looking at his neighbor's house?
But if we stuck with the EBL approach, he could build a massive porch and have it aligned with his neighbor, so he can see down the street. So
I mean, he's already
one
looking at his
unintended
neighbor's house.
consequence is you're going to be, maybe punishing people with larger actual setbacks. They're not going to be able to build as far out as they would have currently. I think Susan was kind of, or Kathy was saying sort of the same thing.
That goes to it would maintain the character, because the porches would be more...
Well, according to architects, perhaps it would maintain diversity.
Right.
But if we're striving for uniformity of
I don't know what we're striving for. I don't think we should be striving
I
here.
think we need to regroup and come back.
Yeah.
Unless we're
What
ready
is
to
it?
vote.
We can just,
Bill Leibovich, former council member and architectural historian who was on the building committee, says that no matter what kind of code you build, you say you're not doing aesthetics, you're doing aesthetics. You can't avoid it. And that over a period of 30 years, you say, who could be thinking of that back then? That it ends up being aesthetics and the aesthetics change.
maybe that's why it's just stuck the 9 foot. Because then everybody...
But I'm not arguing anything about aesthetics. I'm arguing setbacks.
Right. Yeah.
And preserving sight lines.
Yeah.
Right? I'm suggesting that you're creating a non-uniformity of sight lines if you're telling people we're going to require staggering along the street instead of everyone's got to be at least 25 with a 9-foot porch.
But again, in your, Mr. 25 feet is already in front of Mr. 35 foot house.
By 10 feet.
He's looking into his house from his front porch anyway.
Yeah.
But the guy on 35 can build a 10-foot addition and then be equal.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
So he builds a 10-foot addition.
I don't have a view on this. I say we adopt the county and let the porches go where they may. And give them, according to current code.
Why don't you write up the code to
apply EBL only to new construction and adopt the 20% rule for porches and other projections.
Yes.
We'll come back to this.
And then,
see if anyone has any strong views.
Then we can come back to it.
We can vote on it then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
That
We
way
have
resident
to.
comments.
And
We'll have
and have a public hearing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to have to.
We,
We invite everybody to participate in
Yes.
that with their aesthetic, architectural view.
2 edits to the building code in one night. Look at this.
oh
Might
my
as well
God.
combine them.
Okay, moving on.
Moving
Hey,
on,
Matt.
annual
Matt, Can I
survey.
get a bottle of water?
Here, do you want one like this?
Thank you.
Is that
Yeah,
one all right?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Annual survey.
I need some.
Katya?
So the annual survey was pulled from last year's survey. Just a reminder,
Yeah.
we want to keep it very similar feel, and
Right.
also the questions should be the same, so we can have some kind of metrics comparing what the responses were last year and what they are this year. I've made some tweaks to it to change some of the years, apparently not all. And I've added an extra question. We should add another election question in here. I agree with that. But basically, have you gotten a chance to look at this and see?
Thank you for doing it. I apologize. I've not.
Looks good.
One question I have about it is with the leaf vacuuming, because it seems like there was a question of, before we weren't sure it was clear if we were talking about leaf vacuuming in lieu of
So I've added
the
a
collection.
very clear question. And if
Replace
it's
it.
not clear, please let
Right,
me know,
it's-
because
she
I
has-
want it to be
To
replace it,
100% clear
right.
that that's the question.
Okay.
So first
Yes,
question
replacing
is,
it, yeah,
overall,
I'm
are you
sorry.
satisfied with village operations? If you're dissatisfied, let us know why. If you've contacted the office in the last year, this is a change from last year's question, because originally we asked since July 1st.
Right.
So I've changed that to a year, and I think that's kind of what the
Right.
cycle should be now.
Right.
So if you've contacted the village staff, did they respond to you? If you contacted the council, did they respond to you? Then there's a question about the services and what we spend money on. So how do you rank the services that are provided to you, 1 through 5? If you would like additional services, I've added if any, because frankly, we got a lot of responses last time saying it's
So,
it's
fine.
good the way it is.
Right.
So I thought it made sense. And same thing, if you would like to reduce services, if any, let us know what that should be. There's another option, so you could just type in something if it's not an option. Then I've added question 8. Do you support replacing the leaf bag service VMA offers in the fall with leaf vacuuming from the curb?
You gotta get through this, Art.
So the only
She
thing I would
hates,
say
she hates raking.
just somehow figure out a squaring between 6 and 8,
Right.
because
The vacuuming comes up both times.
6 offers there's a potential other, sure, why not? Check that. So then we have a bunch of people saying, yes, that's another additional service I want you to look at doing, but it's not necessarily and in lieu of in that place.
Yeah, in lieu of, just to clarify that it would be
Where it's an in lieu of
a change.
So there is a couple of options, right? We could remove it altogether from 6.
Yeah.
We could see it as it's part of 6 because people want to have both, because it's an additional service.
Yeah.
And then 8 would be asking if they're willing to give up some of that. Then of course,
I don't think that's
did I
clear.
mistype something in there?
No. Number 9 talks about the aesthetic character.
Are there any other, I was trying to think of any other services that
That
we
was
could ask
Richard's question
about.
from last year,
What?
number 9.
I know.
The aesthetic
It's the
character.
exact same.
Was that mine? It can't be.
Are there other services that we can think of to ask about?
There are
Bingo games in the village hall?
some folks were interested in using the village hall, this space for other.
And there, it has been. Is it being done, is it being used now for meetings? It
It
had been
has
done in the
occasionally,
past.
yeah, I think just
So
occasionally.
like if a Girl Scout troop wanted to use it
Right.
or whatever, that's how it's come up in the past. Just for you guys.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the question.
it hasn't, but
It
Right.
hasn't come up in your time here.
Right.
Or Chevy Chase at Home or something like that, having meetings here.
But that's not something necessarily that we're going to be spending more money on,
No,
right?
okay.
This is just
What,
something
are,
that-
where's our imagination? What are some other potential things we could be doing? Oh, we haven't talked about social events, community events.
Is there a question in here about
No.
community
Well,
events?
actually, so number 5, one of the options is village-sponsored community events, such as Halloween.
Oh, yeah, you do have it there, right, okay.
Which, that was one of the highest responded to, if I
Yes.
recall correctly from last year. That was definitely
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, so
I can't think
So
of
it
how do
could
we
anything else.
address 6 and 8 and leave vacuuming?
I think 8 is a good explanation of the potential proposal, and 6, we could either strike it from 6.
Yeah, I'd say if we're gonna have it one place, not the other, it'll be confusing.
But I think we need to find a way to highlight replacing.
She
So
does-
that
she does
it's
say
clear.
replace.
No, I know, but just the word, so that it's really clear that this isn't both. I mean, we're either gonna vacuum leaves or we're gonna bag leaves.
I think it's pretty clear
Yeah.
the way it's phrased.
Well,
Well, but this doesn't explicitly say, which would mean no bags. So
Right.
you would have to purchase your own bags for yard waste or leaf, whatever, year round.
I mean, we could also go into detail and say instead of the 50 bags you receive currently, we would be vacuuming the whole year-round thing, right? You only get 50 bags, which really does not provide
However
the year
appropriate to
supply.
explain, like,
Do we need, like,
question being
do we
asked
feel like we need
is-
to go into that much detail?
I think people need to understand, residents would need to understand who don't listen to our meetings, that the option being offered or the question being asked is, do you want us to vacuum leaves or do you want us to continue giving you leaf bags?
What I was suggesting, not that the word replacing isn't there already, Katya, but that rather underlining it or in some way highlighting that word so that it's really clear when people read the question that they don't just glide over it and not
My
see
only
the word.
hesitation is that we don't highlight any
Any
word
other-
anywhere
right.
else in the survey. And to understand the question, you kind of have to read every question.
Right.
So I would
Okay.
maybe just take out the word service, like, do you support,
Replacing the
replacing-
leaf bags
Leaf bags.
VMA provides.
yeah, with,
But
Vacuuming.
still having yard waste pickup. We would still be having yard waste pickup.
That's a good
we
point.
have to still have yard waste pickup.
Yes, but that's a good point to add it in there. Yard waste will be unaffected by this
Right.
change.
Yes.
Can I just add something quick to that, just thinking about the vacuuming that, I don't know if you would want to put this in the survey, just something to the effect of the, because it could also create a parking issue. I'm personally a fan of the vacuuming, but I wonder if some people would be opposed to it because they'd be concerned about losing.
Yeah.
Safe, it's a safe, well, I think.
Well, people can vote whichever way they feel is more important.
Understands that
Or I
the
mean,
leaves go into
do they
the
have to
street
go
in
in the
order
street,
for
do they
it to
go,
happen?
or can they stay
might
on?
get a
It says from the curb. It says from the curb.
It does say from the curb, it has to be that way. It couldn't be like in the right of way.
Yeah.
Right. That they would have to be on the right-of-way, not on the street.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
That's what, is that what you're
Is that how it's done in
implying?
other villages?
They put it into the street.
They put it in the
And I think it
street.
should be clarified that when reading it, because I think, oh, that's great, and then she said, it's in the street, and I said, oh, wow, no. It's like, it changes your perception of it.
Why can't we burn the leaves like I did when I was a kid?
Or was that
Bonfires.
blowing back in?
That could be a new community
Yeah, a
service.
new community thing. We have big leaf
An
fires.
activity.
The smell of burning leaves
So
is the
vacuum
fall.
from the street would be a more accurate representation of the situation then.
I think
Well, but there,
Well, you're voting for it. And comment, add your comment.
What was the proposal? Did he propose vacuuming from the street, or did he propose vacuuming from?
I'd have to.
To remember the curb.
I'd have to double check. I can't remember.
I thought that they
I'll send
said,
that to you tomorrow. Yeah.
Oh, right.
it was my thought that he talked about that the leaves were kept on the right-of-way because part of the concern
That's not the
was
street.
Blocking the street.
that it doesn't block the street,
That
but
actually addresses that.
Yeah, we should just clarify it in the question.
We'll clarify it before the survey goes out.
Yeah.
And it
And
was
so if it's
also,
not on the street, actually, in the proposals that we have, I will specifically say not on the street. So on the right-of-way, not the street.
right, okay.
And that somehow this,
People without driveways might be more inclined to vote for it. I have a driveway, I'm for it, but I mean, I would imagine if I were a resident who didn't have a driveway, I would be concerned.
I just
Okay.
want to make a note for all of you that on the village listserv, we put all of these documents ahead of the meeting. So that periodically I look out there and I'm thinking, oh my God, nobody can see this. But in fact, all of these documents have been made available ahead of this meeting. I just want to reaffirm that.
it should have been an email direct residence to each house,
Well, yeah, I agree.
Okay.
not on the listserv, via direct
Okay, so
email.
we're striking fall leaf vacuuming from number 6. We've talked about number 8.
Yeah.
Next is, I believe the village's building codes have been effective in maintaining the aesthetic character of the village. Do we still want to ask that question?
I think, take out aesthetic,
Right.
because we're not supposed to be regulating
Do we need
aesthetic.
to ask the
The
question
charac-
still,
the
or was it a
character.
one-time question? To me, it seems like it was a one-time question.
Oh.
Just because we didn't make any changes to the
Right,
codes.
okay, take it out.
We made a lot of changes to the building
Yeah.
code
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah, but we haven't done anything to affect
Yeah.
the overall look.
Overall look, what?
We have not done anything to affect the overall look.
So
Take it out.
take it out.
Okay, enforcement of building codes.
Okay, so do you believe the enforcement of the building codes has been fair and effective?
That's fine, delete
That's
that.
fine.
Can we add a comment? I don't remember if these all just come with a comment, but if someone...
You're able to add comments at the end
Okay.
if there's no comment in the particular question.
I think I would like to, maybe on that one, add a,
It complicates the analysis of it too.
yes, no, but if they can add a comment on that specific one.
On which one?
The enforcement of the building codes.
I mean, I think number 10, like, agree, disagree, whatever, but if someone has specific comment on that.
Okay, so like a 10A?
You can't, I don't remember the functionality, if it just allows for a comment box. Like one of these
fact, I think
earlier
you
No,
do
ones.
actually
have
it doesn't.
some.
So if it's
Well,
one
the
of those,
other-
if it's a multiple choice.
It's
if
number
it's a single-
2 is a separate question. Sorry, that's the,
Yeah.
okay.
So
Understood.
in one of the instances where we're asking if you're satisfied with village operations, we then have a separate question that says, if you are not, let us know what's wrong.
Oh.
So unless we do something like that here, it's really, there's no functionality for
Okay.
the comment box.
So I would argue for adding a bullet in there, or a 10A, so that someone can fill in that.
Okay. All right, then number 11, what is the most effective method of communicating information to you? So this is email, paper, etc. Number 12 is what kind of information would you like to receive from the village office? And
Should we clarify events? Well, it doesn't matter, never mind.
it has other.
Notice of upcoming village events versus the policy will be amended and adopted, so it doesn't matter.
And the other actually has a text box, so whatever
Okay.
someone wants to see it. So that's kind of the layout that does allow it to type in. Then number 13, we were asking for volunteers so we can tap into the village talents. I'm suggesting replacing that with just a simpler, if you would like to volunteer on a short-term or long-term basis, let us know.
That sounds good.
Volunteer your efforts to something to the village, like
Well, I said volunteer your time, no?
to Martin's Edition. Want to volunteer your time to
Oh,
babysit my
Time or expertise? Oh, volunteer
Both.
time or expertise?
Time and.
Because here you have your, in your first paragraph, you may be an expert in something.
Yeah.
Like we had somebody come in and look at our contract, remember contracting
Right.
procedures?
Okay. So that would read, would you like to volunteer your time and expertise to the Village of Martin's additions
Yeah.
on a short-term or
Yeah.
long-term basis? If you are, please contact the council
Right.
directly and the email address. And then number 14 is, would you
Anything
like
else?
anything else you'd like to share? For example, you can provide suggestions on what you would like to see more or less of and how we operate. And the last required question is your street name.
And we're going to insert something about elections before.
Okay. Good, thank you.
It may be at the end as the temporary questions, so we should have a core of questions that don't necessarily change. I may move the leaf vacuuming to the end as well, and let those be kind of the varying questions every year.
Yeah, I think it should just come before, those two questions, leaf vacuuming and elections should come before, do you have anything else?
Right,
And
yes.
yeah.
Okay,
Thank you for doing this.
sure.
Moving on to
So
right-of-way.
the next steps is, I'm going to update this. I'm going to circulate it back.
Yes,
And if we're all okay, please respond by email, you're okay, and then we'll post it.
perfect.
Because I want to bite the next council meeting, I'd like it to be open for 2 weeks, closed and summarized and presented.
Are you going, so when you say, so you're going to put up a trial run?
No,
Oh, no,
I'm going to
just
send the
show it.
language to be,
Okay.
to make sure everybody's okay with
the
the
Do we
language.
still have the
Language of-
survey subscription? Beth and Matt, that's a question for you guys. Just, we still have it? Okay. When you circulate it, I had a problem looking at the Google Docs for my handheld. Would you mind attaching it and Google Docking it, or sticking it in the body of an email? I just couldn't get the Google Doc to
I
open.
don't have Word on my computer, but I can stick it in the body of the email.
That would be great. Thank you.
PDF?
Mine wouldn't open the first time. The second time I tried it.
It does on my
I'm not
computer when
sure
I'm at my
why.
house, but it
Yeah.
won't open on my phone. I haven't been
Okay,
It's probably
can we move on
Yes, let's.
to right-of-way licensing agreements?
Okay, so it was suggested that we take a look at our right-of-way policy to make sure, our code, actually, to make sure that the rationale and legislative intent are upheld without imposing, I guess, any undue restrictions on resident plantings. And the exercise of a homeowner's
Right,
right
applying
to,
for a right-of-way license.
and the necessity, therefore, or
tab number 7.
Tab number 7.
and so this is 7209.
Maintenance of the public right-of-way was the 7209. And B was one of the ones that we looked at, which is place any structure, wall, shrubbery, except low-growing plants
Without a license.
without a license.
And then the other question is later on in it is maybe maintained but not replaced, provided it does not interfere in a manner with pedestrian or vehicular traffic.
So I know that there was an email from council on this one too that I skimmed. I don't recall everything on.
It was legislative history on why we did this.
And it
And do you
involves,
can you summarize that?
Sure. From its inception, the village code has always required a license to use the right-of-way to place a structure in the right-of-way. and didn't regulate vegetation. And like many surrounding jurisdictions, Martin's Additions found itself in a position of having not regulated vegetation for decades, and could point to many examples of hedges and shrubs having grown so large that in some instances blocking parking spaces or obstructing sidewalks. And so the village decided to start to enforce regulations regarding vegetation in the right-of-way to prevent obstructions to the right-of-way. And there was also an incident where the village's traffic engineer found that some evergreen trees that a resident had planted in the right-of-way adjoining a corner lot were obstructing motorist sight lines, and the village asked the resident to take them out, and the resident didn't want to do so because the resident thought that they were an important part of the landscape and felt because the resident had put them in that they ought to remain. And we actually had to go to court on that one. So the benefit of requiring...
And the outcome was that the trees were removed.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, just
For the record.
for the record.
Right. So the benefit of having a license to use the right-of-way is mostly to manage expectations. Generally speaking, the town holds in trust for the benefit of the public the rights-of-way, and the public is allowed to use the right-of-way to its fullest extent from border to border. There is no private right to exclusive use of the right-of-way, but it is common practice for local governments to allow certain things in unused portions of the right-of-way with the expectation that if public use of the right-of-way ever expands, if a utility needs to lay a pipe, or the sidewalk needs to be relocated, or who knows, 100 years from now, trains are replacing our pavement, that those private improvements need to be removed. But if you don't have a written document stating that, some residents may be hesitant to remove their private improvement, or I've actually also seen situations where the improvement may be so old that the resident disclaims ownership of it, and then the town is stuck with the potential of having to go to court to prove who owns it and who should remove it and at whose cost. But it can be a burden for residents to have to apply. The village has to pay me to write the agreement, and then we record it in land records. Recording it is currently free because we are a government. However, well, let me say that I've been recording these for 10 years. My predecessor's been recording them recorded them for 20 years before me, and his predecessor, I've traced it back to the early 90s. And just recently, I had one refused, and I called the clerk and asked why, and apparently the court is now rethinking whether they should be free. So I don't think we're going to have to, but we may have to pay recording fees for each one. It'll be minimal in the scheme of things, but just so you're aware, it could be $75 or around that. One option is a middle ground. Right now, we say any vegetation over 12 inches, you got to have approval, and any structure, you got to have approval. A middle ground would be, as Matt pointed out, we don't require a license for an apron, a driveway apron, because it's generally understood that you got to have a driveway apron, and it's
But I thought we put those in.
We require a permit, but not a license.
Okay.
Okay, so you could treat other things similarly. You could say, we won't require a license for a walkway leading to the front door. because that is something that is clearly the owners and not a public improvement, so it may be less likely 50 years from now someone would argue, that's not my walkway, that's yours, you have to take care of it. Same with an apron, driveway apron. And the more serious things where you might need an agreement would be the retaining walls, fences, that someone in the future may argue that's not mine, or I've had it for 20 years and I don't want to remove it because I needed to retain the grade, or I needed to keep people off of my flowers.
We had an instance where a utility had to take something out, and
Shrubs.
a resident wanted the village to pay for the replacement.
And interfered with the utilities, or this may be a different
Yeah,
thing,
no.
but interfered with the construction work and called the people very bad names.
I think it might have been me.
No, it
No,
wasn't.
it wasn't.
I got called the names.
No, it wasn't you. But if you
Before your
want to,
time here.
right, if you want to accept responsibility, we can include it in the minutes.
Okay,
So the question then was, there have been 3 instances recently where people have said, do we really have to do this? I mean, there was one of where a person put slate over the top of their concrete sidewalk leading from the sidewalk, the village sidewalk, to their front door. Another one replaced their sidewalk, which was crumbling. And, we said,
Walkway, not sidewalk.
walkway, I'm sorry, to the front door, and that, we also said that one because that's what our rules required. This isn't that the staff is doing anything wrong. I mean, they're doing what they're supposed to do, which is bring these to our attention. And then there is the one of replacing or enlarging a small growth garden, rocks, whatever, and it asks for a license for that. It isn't clear to me how you say, well, this is so minor, we're not going to require that. I mean,
Why do we ask for a license for a small garden? Were the plants over 12 inches?
well, I don't remember if they had the potential to be.
The rose bushes, was it rose
No.
bushes?
It's not that one.
There were
They're
rocks,
small.
and that was the question, is if that constitutes a structure or it's nebulous. It's questionable.
Fences and retaining walls there's not a
Clear.
question about that. They're clear. Some plantings, low-level landscaping, pavements is less clear.
And so, but so does the 12 inches also apply to, effectively a wall around the garden?
Well,
Well, no, because it's
No,
called a
because
structure.
yeah, that's clearly.
Well, it's not really a wall. In this
Stacked
particular
stones.
instance, they circled around the garden with stones. It looks quite nice. It's just stones all around it. So
Technically,
essentially,
they're individual pieces that are under 12 inches.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at,
But the 12 inches only applies to shrubbery.
growing
To grow.
plantings right
but
now.
they are under 12 inches.
They are.
Yeah.
They're probably 8 inches.
As long as the stones weren't connected by cement.
Right,
They did
seems
not
like a
destroy
stretch
them.
otherwise.
So the question is, do we loosen it up so we only include things that are obvious structures? Is that the question? Do we-
Obvious structures, trees, or shrubs of a certain height.
Yeah.
But,
So anything that can basically obstruct the view, right?
yeah, the sight lines or present a challenge to public necessity.
Yeah, how do you write that up in code?
Well,
and
one option would be to say at-grade structures are exempted. So you can put in,
Pavers or something?
right, a walkway.
We have a
You
few
could sit-
instances though where those at-grade structures, and this came up during WSSC's work, will be torn up by necessary utility
Yeah.
work.
Well, that can happen. It can happen for any of this.
Well,
So
you can have a list of exemptions,
okay.
but you're saying exemptions might be a bad idea because
Yeah.
you're still creating the expectation that they're okay and that they're going to
No,
be
the thing is, they can put them down, but they have to, there's an expectation they can be dug up.
So
And
we
it
could put that in the code to put people on notice.
And promulgate the code
Instead of-
again.
Yeah.
And just remind everyone that they are at risk of losing them should there be a necessity
Should be
to move them. I think so.
So that
You know, we've grandfathered in so much.
We can't grandfather in right-of-way incursions.
Well, we have.
We have?
I mean, if you walk down Thornapple, is a good example of where there are places that you are literally pushed onto the street because there are bushes a lot more than 12 inches high. Yeah, and that take up, I mean, that happens on, it seems to me, Chestnut too, that there's a lot of walkway where people are forced onto the street because of shrubbery.
Well, they say they've grandfathered in, they're there, but we've never approved them.
Well, we have grandfathered vegetation existing as of 2009 when we adopted the provision, provided it's maintained in a manner that doesn't obstruct use of the right-of-way.
Okay.
But how do you, these very things we're talking about, I want to get back to Thornapple, which I think is because the street is so narrow and there's no place to walk except in the street. Should we be enforcing some rule that says you have to take these shrubs out? Of course, if we in fact decide to move on a sidewalk, that would really clarify that.
Yeah.
And is this license agreement, this is a new, you're saying to set a standard where people understand that there would be a license?
Well, there is one
a
now.
standard in the
There
code.
is.
There is one.
People are not asked to actually formally sign something to
Yeah.
reinforce it.
They are.
They are now.
Yeah, and it is filed with their deed,
Right.
so that if you sell your property, that the next owner is obligated to the same maintenance and ownership.
It's been in the code since 1989 for structures, and it was added to the code for vegetation in 2009.
And one of the instances is a person had a walkway, and we discovered that they were replacing their walkway and they say, so we asked them to do a license agreement, and their argument was, why do I have to sign this? My walkway was crumbling as it was. I'm just maintaining it. Now you're making me pay $100 and sign this legal agreement thing that I didn't have to and wouldn't have had to if I let it go into disrepair. That's their argument.
And I guess for the village government perspective, this is the piece of paper that says you're on notice that if there's something that has to be done in the right of way here that impacts the work that you've done on that portion of the walkway, too bad.
Yeah.
But you also have to pay $100.
Yes.
But you said there's another thing. In addition to licensing, there's another thing.
Oh, yeah, so if you're looking for options, one option would be to exempt the minor things. I wouldn't use the word minor. I would suggest we come up with a list.
But there was another word you used.
But then write it into the code, so we're still putting people on notice.
Right.
So, do you want to come up with some
at grade? Is that what you're saying?
No, you said you can either license or you can...
We have permits. So
permit.
we have if people put in a new driveway.
Yeah.
Well, then we issue a permit for it. But they send in the building permit application, and that's it. Whereas if they were putting in a walkway, they would put in the building permit application with a set of plans, and then we would send it over, and Ron would write up an agreement with them. Then they would come and sign that as well. We would notarize it and then send it back to Ron to submit to the land records.
But I think
But
that,
that's a license.
That's a license.
Okay.
but I think we also
between
need,
the permit and the license is going to be binding on successors and
Right.
title.
okay, and the other thing is that if we're going to do licensing, then Doug goes out and has to measure so that everything becomes part of that, and it is his estimate that between his time and Ron's time, we spend about $500
That is
to-
so much, sorry.
for this license that the homeowner pays $100 for. I'd like to just recommend that, Ron, if you can find a way to give us proposed language that we could look at that addresses some of these issues that it feels like we're just a village of rules. I mean, there has to be a way for some of these to be exceptions without opening the door so wide that we don't have rules. And if you could give us some language.
Maybe and collaborate with Matt and Doug, who are going to be doing the day-to-day
Right,
enforcement
right.
about, okay, how would this,
But this
how does this
doesn't
work in
change
practice?
your day-to-day enforcement. I mean, I don't want to leave you with the impression that the staff has done what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, that part is really clear. I think we need to find a way to, I don't like the word relax, but just to make it less onerous.
What?
Ease.
Lessen the burden on the residents.
Yeah. Lessen the burden, but maintain clarity about right way.
So,
Who could,
so the original issue was overgrown shrubs, basically, right? That would.
There's been shrubs, there's been fences, I mean, we've had retaining
Fences,
walls.
there were
Okay, so I get the whole
rocks.
structures and fences, like
Yeah.
that's clearly,
Yeah.
to me, that's, much more clear than
Yeah.
something that is like a garden
Yeah.
or a shrub. So what if we put in the code something that said, if you plant anything within the right-of-way, then you're responsible for it. And if you don't take care of it, then the village can take care of it and charge you up to a certain amount.
Well, but the thing is that the height business is quite important so that you can open car doors, so that you can get out and use that right of way. You can't have people just putting in.
It's also a
And
safety
for
issue.
utilities and.
It's a safety. Yeah.
That issue, right? So, but the whole point is that in some instances, we had shrubs obstructing views
Right.
and opening doors and all that. So what if we just stated in the code, you have to abide by whatever the rules are that
Right.
we have
Right.
to keep the sightlines clear. And if you don't, then the village could come and enforce that because it's the right of way that belongs to the village and charge you for whatever that fee is. That way the resident doesn't.
I think I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, and the reason we put it in the land records now is, for example, if, at my home, I planted a big hedge, and then I sold my house, and the next person says, I don't want to deal with that hedge. I didn't plant it. I never signed an agreement saying I'm going to take care of it. It's in the village right of way. You take care of it.
But that's why I'm saying that, if then it overgrew, the village could take it down and charge them.
But then the potential of the problem with that second homeowner is like, it's not mine, it's in your.
But it's in the code that if you live in this house and there's something in the right of way, you're responsible for it.
Well, but the licensing agreement, because it transfers with the house, transfers the ownership.
Burnings.
Well, it depends on how many of them. That's why I'm saying to Ron, let's see if we can find a way to take it,
A middle ground.
back it off a bit.
So the primary concern, I think, is walkways, right? What else? Maybe some stairs that are installed in sloping topography to get from the street to the house. Do we have any of those in the village?
Yeah?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how many are in the right of way.
Probably.
The one that we have pending now is.
Yeah, at least some.
Yeah, so I think we can come up with a limited list of things that can be exempted, and like Katia said, we can write into the code if the adjoining or abutting landowners may continue to use the right-of-way, but if public use requires, they must remove it at the village's demand.
Are you, and that we would maintain some of the current language in the code is about, safe and sanitary, like grasses and, again, not aesthetics, but a,
Functional.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a tougher question. I can definitely see a way to relax the provision for structures. The vegetation is much harder. Right now we have the requirement anything over 12 inches needs a license, and that includes one of the examples in the packet, the rose bushes.
Things that community gardens often will use to prevent people from putting in permanent kinds of plants, and I'd be happy to pull the language, like woody, specific kinds of woody structures that are going to be there. There are plenty of plants that are over 12 inches, and if you're regulating those, that is pure aesthetics. And a foxglove shoots up a thing that's higher than 12 inches. Is that going to, I think that there's existing language that could be useful in this.
Well, the way we have it now says any tree, hedge, shrubbery, or other plant growth. It's pretty all-inclusive.
Over 12
inches, yeah.
Which gets into aesthetics in my mind.
Well, it's a safety. It is, again, you have to remember that it's can be between the sidewalk and the street. And so for people getting in and out of cars.
Fire trucks, ambulances,
Could shoot up a flower that's taller than 12.
Right.
I have a garden with echinacea and black-eyed Susans, and they're 2 or 3, probably
and they're
3
also
feet tall.
movable very easily and not going to obstruct anyone's view.
Right.
I'm just,
I think
12 inches, excuse me.
whatever we end up with, I just want to make sure that it's very clear for staff,
Yes.
clear for residents, and it's enforceable going forward, because I don't want there to be, like, another year from now, we're sitting back down here having the same conversation about, okay, well, what is it in the right of way? Where's the, if it's, to me, as protecting the village is the paramount thing about, whether it's a plant, a shrub, or wooded, some people's sidewalks, some people have slate, some people have concrete, that in the end, if the village needs to say, we came in and we needed to do something, or we came in and we needed to do something, that there isn't going to be a problem for you, or you. That it just needs to be very clear. It's in the right of way. It was written clearly in the code. Everybody had notice, and hopefully we were able to talk to a resident beforehand. But if not the case, then there's not going to be.
So there should be things that are clearly requires licenses.
Right.
Other things don't.
Not so much.
Okay. Have you got enough guidelines?
More than enough.
Treasurer's report.
Treasury's report. We're doing well. Not much has happened. Our main income receipts don't start coming in until late November. One thing I discovered yesterday and clarified with Dan Baden, the reports that we get where he has the budget, monthly budget and year-to-date budget, is not just 1/12 of the annual or the prorated amount, but if he knows that the property tax receipts come in February, he doesn't include that in the prorated amount until February. So I was looking at everything and I said, am I understanding this? And he says, yeah, and he says, here's why. Anyway, it doesn't make much difference or anything, but I did this time I say clearly prorated. Everything I have allocated by month, a fraction of a year, rather than what he was doing. So that's the only change. The other thing is what I focus on is our reserve accounts. We have put away have set aside, I should say, $500,000 for street repaving, $250,000 for sidewalks, and $500,000 for streetlights. The RFPs for the repaving are just coming in, and we're lucky. The RFPs are almost just about what the money we have set aside. And this was not skill, but it turned out to be luck. So we have enough money, I think, in our reserve accounts to pay for all of these big capital budgets that are coming along. That's it.
The one thing that we had talked about in the last meeting I didn't see, and I don't know who needs to communicate with Dan, is about the designated for funds for when.
Yeah, Arthur and I spoke about that briefly, and I did reach out to Dan. His suggestion was to hold off, and I asked why not just pay it off now and get it done, and his reasoning was because the way it's written is it needs to be paid by, I believe it's March of 2019. Yeah, the end of March 2019. Mm-hmm. So there's no penalties for waiting to pay until then. Mm-hmm. So
and there's also the possibility of more.
We would add interest. We would gain interest on what we have now if we left it.
And there's possibility of more charges coming in.
And he also said
none of that impacts the just putting it as a designated.
Making it a designated
that says,
okay,
as
set
of
aside.
X date,
yeah, we
set
can do
aside
that. Sure.
this amount.
Yeah, for whatever reason, he was suggesting to wait until FY19 if that's when we were going to pay it. He said that in the fiscal year 19 budget we add something called win liability or something. But
we could do it. There's no reason not to.
I look at it as a liability as of right now.
Yeah, it is.
We'll have to pay that.
Yeah,
money
we are.
back.
We know. We know.
Well, and it'll show up in the audit.
Yeah, when we know.
Beth had something she was going to add.
Yeah.
This is on another topic. Do you want to do the budget amendment for the leaf bags today?
Yeah, we could.
Sure.
There's no reason not to.
As part of his
report, how much do we have to add?
How much was that?
It's in the back of the section. We have to add
$4,025.
So is there any objection though to Dan just adding that as a line? It doesn't change our ability to earn.
No, well, it's a very even amount. How much was it? I can't remember.
$4,025.
No, not the leaf bags. The
win payment.
$250,000 or something.
Wasn't it 150?
150. I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Whatever the current estimate is, I again think it's a liability we currently have.
Yeah, a big lump sum.
I'm sorry, I just had this thought. Can we go back to the leaf vacuum question for just 1 second? I'm thinking that maybe add in there that it will not significantly increase the cost of the service.
I don't think people know what the current costs are.
Yeah,
But
I
don't
think that's confusing.
I think it's an important piece of
Yeah,
information.
is that true?
It was within 1,000 or 2.
But there's a difference between leaf, well, in my brain, I don't know if it translates.
And like
well
with
here,
this
the difference between-
$4,000 amendment, it would actually push us over the estimate that we received for the leaf vacuum.
But those leaf bags cover yard waste and other things that are not just leaves, whereas the leaf vacuuming just picks up
In my
leaves.
house, those leaf bags, they do not last past the leaf season. So,
I have 18-year supply.
and I'm always
down.
out.
I mean,
I don't know.
At the
'cause
bottom of the pile,
We
they're
always buy
collectibles.
before we're done with the leaves. We always get them. So anyway, so just adding that line in there. Is there objections to adding that it's roughly the same cost?
At roughly the same cost. Yeah, roughly the same cost.
but it's not the same service.
Yeah. No.
I'm not suggesting that it's the same service.
No.
Okay.
Okay, a motion to
Add.
approve, in addition to the budget
replace
for
one expense for them?
leaf bags of, Beth, how much?
$4,025.
$4,025. I move that we amend the budget to increase the leaf bag allotment, or whatever it is.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Okay.
Yes, and you can put the language in.
You just said opposed and you looked at me like.
No, I was, manager's report.
Yay.
Or do you want to do Doug's first, or
Oh, sure, yeah.
do you want to wait?
It's up to you all.
No, Doug, why don't you go ahead, Doug, and then you can...
It's in your report. Basically, it's the same as last month. We've got 3 houses under construction, or additions to 3 houses on Cummings Lane and 2 on Rainy Street. They're all progressing. We have 4 right-of-way license agreements that are pending. The bigger issue is we're still trying to resolve the intersection of Quincy and Oxford, and this Matt's trying to set up a meeting up with Joe Kutro so we can look at the latest concept and get that resolved. You remember that the inlet up here at Shepherd Street and Brookville Road was partially repaired in the spring. The state's supposed to come back out and finish that repair this month.
But before you, Quincy and Oxford, all it says is Montgomery County decided it was too expensive and would set a bad precedent. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we're disregarding cost, but what is the cost? And if we were paying for it, would they do it? If we decide that we want to assume the financial responsibility, would they allow us to go forward with whatever plans they think are best for the intersection, which would solve our safety, security, and traffic problems and alleviate them of having any liability going forward for precedents?
Well, the procedure would be you have to submit a concept to the county. They would approve the concept, then you would submit a structural design to the county. They would approve that, and then you would have to rebuild the inlet. And I'm guessing, off the top of my head, $20,000.
I think, oh, at least, okay. For some reason, the figure 16,000 was in my head, was what I think Joe was maybe thinking it
You
would.
have to design the whole structure, then have it built, and tear down the old one, because it's a brick structure.
I'm not going to speak for everybody else, but for me, the idea of getting a fire truck through there safely for $20,000 is a bargain.
Oh,
But I
that's
don't know
still
if
an
that...
option, but we wanted to review the geometrically changing that filter before we went.
Geometrically changing the what?
The curve radius.
The curve.
Okay.
And it's...
Make it bigger.
I think it's... I've walked that, and Lynn Welly had his hose out there to show us, which was the alignment that seemed to work when I went down and looked at it.
But there was a problem with that.
The problem with this alignment was when a truck comes down Quincy and makes the right onto Oxford, the rear wheels drag farther outside, and if those wheels hit that structure, which is an old brick structure, it's going to crumble. So what we were trying to do was leave a section of curb to protect that structure, which his alignment didn't accomplish.
Okay.
So now we've got another option we want to pass by Joe.
Okay.
Which will save some of the curb to protect the inlet, but still make the radius larger.
You know...
So if option A didn't work, this is option B. If option B doesn't work with Kudrow, is it time to just try option C?
Option B is a lot cheaper than C, but it's still
Understood.
Well, now, is it possible that sewer inlet, as I recall, it's like a vertical one, isn't it? And what, is it possible to just have a flat sewer inlet there with a grate over it? That's in the middle of the street?
Well, it's not in the middle of the street, it's on the curb.
I know, but if you realigned it, it could be in the middle of the street. You see what I mean?
I'm guessing that street's so small, you've got water, gas, electric all in there. Water and sewer, you're not going to have any room for an inlet in the street itself. But it's a curb inlet, so it sits behind the street.
Yeah.
And the water flows down the curb into the inlet.
Yeah.
That would have to all be redesigned, and that's really expensive.
Yeah.
Because of the existing utilities in the street, you have to tear the pavement up.
So you better make the decision quickly, find out if B works before we repave our streets.
Okay, we'll continue to see how that goes.
The state will come in hopefully this month and rebuild the structure up here at Shepherd and Brookville, finish rebuilding it.
Okay.
And that we're putting together the information to send over to AMT to upgrade the GIS system. And we're hoping to get that done this month, but we might not, we might have to wait till October.
Okay.
Did you get better responses from nothing?
No.
So if we're still not getting positive responses from AMT for the work of updating the survey, which has come up at least twice, right?
Right. We've taken it to another level of Ron has now looked at that contract and we have an opinion from him. And so at some point we are going to have to lay out for AMT that it was in your contract and for whatever reason.
I mean, that's one piece of it, but
Yeah.
just the general problems have continued as well, so.
I mean, to go to a different contractor.
Well, we've talked about that.
I pulled out the original RFP that was done in 2007, made copies and gave it to Ron tonight. So the both of us are going to look at that and see if there's anything that's helpful.
Okay.
But then we had talked about it, and we want to have a meeting with AMT to try to get this resolved.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that you guys are, both of you are getting whatever the support you need to, either they're doing what they're contractually obligated to do and you're fine, or we're, saying and supporting you with, all right, it's time to move on and find somebody else who's going to provide you the service you need. Especially if we're talking about right-of-ways and sidewalks. I mean, that's...
Okay.
Pat.
Thank you, Doug. Matt?
All right, I'll try to make this as short and sweet as possible, although there are a couple kind of big biggies in there. We've been working with Dan Baden, the village accountant, and LSWG on audit items. So I think after tonight we'll have all of the items to send back to them, so should be good there. Just a reminder that the Halloween party is coming up. It's on October 30th. Should be a really good time. Just wanted to give a shout out to Keith Allen, who's helping with planning and storage and also providing electricity and restrooms. We do have a couple volunteers, but we are definitely looking for additional volunteers to help set up and assist with activities and crafts and clean up, things of that nature, or additional planning, anything that might come up. Looking at analytics on the website, our page views are about average. They sort of dip down in the summer months when people are away and right after the elections, and they're a little bit higher during the election time. We're at about 1,500 page views right now. Just a reminder of village office hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. The best way to get in contact with us is by email, especially outside village office hours. I have my email forwarded directly to me, so I'm usually accessible and get back relatively quickly to inquiries. The newsletter, we're continuing to publish it online. We have 17 paper copies mailed each month. The directory, just a reminder that we do have extras still, so if anybody needs them, feel free to contact the office and we can get that to you. We've been working on contracts consistent with our charter and policy. So we put out a formal RFP for the municipal code enforcement, municipal operations and code enforcement work. And proposals will be due by the end of the month, so hopefully we should have that going. We triggered our option clause with Rolling Acres to continue snow plowing with them. We're working on a formal RFP for the village arborist position. I am hoping to get that out in the next week or two, probably by the end of the month. Should have a final draft on that to be able to post on the MML website. And then the other one was for our website. We discussed possibly putting together an RFP. We've received a couple proposals from companies to redo and host our website. Safety. The police are contributing safety tips on a semi-monthly basis, so I think they did last month, so they will again next month. The big one was there were a lot of theft from auto in the Chevy Chase area, so just to double check your car doors are locked, don't keep any valuables in there if possible, and definitely out of view. And there were a couple just probably nothing, but resident emailed about a strange person knocking on their door when a babysitter was there. So if you do notice any suspicious activity, we're a pretty tight-knit community, so the residents would know better than anyone if something suspicious is going on. Feel free and please do contact the police. Moving on to utilities, WSSC has removed all the vehicles from the village and is done with all their utility work. We did do a walkthrough to identify issues that cropped up during their work with them, and they claim that they've addressed these issues, so we just need to do another walkthrough to make sure that they were addressed adequately. And just as a reminder that once we've sort of signed off on it, we still do have 1 year for them to come back and fix anything if grass isn't growing back the way it was before, or something of that nature. So if an issue arises a couple months down the road, don't feel like it was too late. Please do still contact the village office. Streetlights. Okay, so I'm gonna try to. A lot of this is the same information I shared last week. This is where we are. Induction lights are no longer an option. Hall of Fame has
gotten out of the business.
Ceased and desisted on induction lights. So we essentially have two viable options. The first is to go with the LED lights that did about as well as the induction lights on the survey and cost the same amount, possible, really even less actually with OEM costs and all that.
Question on that.
Yes.
So this says it's 55 watt LED light.
Mm-hmm.
What is the warmth of that light?
3,000 Kelvin. Which is that's the custom made one that we had asked for.
So is it identical to the custom made one on Bradley?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So I attached to the next page what it would cost us if we wanted to put in these LED lights. So there's kind of two things going on. They've priced us out for putting up the 7 new poles, and I'm assuming on those we would go with the LED as opposed to the high pressure sodium. Right. I'm assuming that because we like those more, and either would cost money to put in new poles. So it's going to cost $7,150 per pole, 7 new poles, just over $50,000 to put in those. Then there is the 63 existing locations, so that takes out the poles that have been recommended to be taken out because they've been replaced by these new pole locations. There will be 63 other poles that would in theory need new lights. It would cost, the estimate on it was $3,194 per pole, or per light, so over $200,000. And then spares, I just kind of threw that out there, 10% in stock. And one of the questions we had was, well, why would we get spares? The reason is because they're custom lights. LED lights in the future are going to be dimmable, but that is not available right now. So the suggestion from them was to have a couple extra in spare. Although an LED light is expected to last 20 to 30 years, things happen, storms, and we don't. And to keep uniformity, it makes sense to have some spares instead of then having to replace an LED light with the high pressure sodium.
So to me, it sounds like the number of poles has cut down. Don't we have about 80 poles? Why is it down to 70 now?
63 existing.
Well, we have.
From what I was reading in the past, I'm pretty sure it was more than that.
Okay. That's possible. I did kind of throw this together. I tried to hand count how many poles we had on our thing. The other thing is that we're taking out something like 10 poles or something.
Really?
Yeah.
If
Just
we
because,
follow
for
Scott's
example,
old
if you look,
maps.
Say that, I didn't hear what?
Taking out temples.
so like up here at Dead End Delfield, we've got, right now we have three actually. We have 3 poles, and he suggested taking this one out and putting that one there.
Oh,
On Delfield, on the lower end of Delfield, we have a pole here at the intersection of Thornapple, down here, and at the intersection of Taylor. And then also these ones. Sorry. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's suggesting we take out these 2.
No, Dead End Delfield's a nullity,
Yeah.
because there's a new pole and
But
an old pole.
here we're
but-
taking,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But
we're taking
Delfield's
out 1 here. This is,
Because of the way the light will be distributed.
yeah, and same. So and on the southern end of the village, so the dark spots were in the northern end. So they're mostly one for one that you're taking out. In the southern end, we're taking out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So some, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4. It's late, but something like 8 or 9 poles in the southern end. So
who's suggesting this?
that was Scott Watson's lighting design for our village.
Can we just make sure that the count is right?
It may not be,
So the numbers then would be
so
higher.
it's subject to change. So yeah, you may be right. I just hand counted them, so there's a decent chance that it's off, but it still gives you an idea because it's going to be $3,194
Right.
per pole. So assuming these numbers are right, it would cost us a little over $275,000, which is significantly less. And even if we're talking about 5, 6, 7, even
Talking
10
about
more poles,
300,000.
we're still significantly under what we've budgeted for light replacement. The other option is to put in the new lights to take care of the dark spots, and to just let our lights go. And they're okay now. Once they go out, they'll be replaced by high pressure sodium.
No.
Okay, so if that's not an option, pretty much this is our only option with the LED. So,
But it's the lights that we wanted to begin with.
Yes, yes.
The preferred LEDs.
yes, correct.
Not the ultimate preference.
So we have, sorry, just to ask that for the third time, but we have confirmed that it's the exact custom bulb, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So what do we do to proceed then?
So if the
I
county's
have a question just on the spare issue. If they can mass produce them now, are they saying they can't mass produce them later? So that's why we would need order spares now? If they can produce them now, why couldn't they produce them 10 years
they're
from
custom.
now?
They're custom lights. So so it'll take about 6 weeks for them to get the lights for our new poles. I'm not entirely sure what the timing is. That's
So
versus
the reason to get a spare now is
if a light
one malfunctions, we wouldn't want to wait
We're in a
6
storm, we
weeks.
lose 10 lights,
Yeah,
what
a
do we
tree
do?
comes down.
Got it.
right,
Okay.
and we don't want to wait 6 weeks
6
for
weeks
them
for
to
them to
produce
create it. Okay.
produce us these
I
custom
wonder
lights.
why did we have custom lights? This might. This is
Because the
what's
other
got-
options were the 100 LED
Which are too
super
big.
glare. Most of the
Yeah.
other ones were very glary
Right.
and
They're just
sort
made
of a
for wider
different color.
streets to
Yeah.
distribute more light than what we have.
Thank you for doing this.
So I guess the next thing would be with the county's approval, or the council's approval rather.
Go.
I'll move forward with
Yes.
this and start to
Yes.
schedule them to come in and okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Wow. Woo.
Great. So
Roads and lights.
progress. The next one is
Finally!
Our streets are going to be like racetracks.
streets and sidewalks. We received four proposals.
Yeah.
We've sort of narrowed it down to one kind of preferred contender.
I went
and then-
over who's the preferred? Can we say that?
Can we say we've down selected to 2
Yes.
responses, and Matt has some questions that he's going to.
Because I noticed some were just put in, the RFP asked for assessment of gutters, curbs, and sidewalks. Some just did a straight, you have a 200 feet, we're going to put in 200 feet of roads, sidewalks, gutters, everything, without...
Yeah,
we don't want to talk about names on the record.
That's right.
Yeah,
okay. That's why I don't want to do that.
each proposal sort of approached it in a different way, which is fine because that's sort of the way that we intended for it to be written, to see kind of the care they put into it, and so we have two that we're going to move forward with. I'm actually meeting with one of them tomorrow.
Good.
So moving forward with that. And
congratulations on getting that out and getting them back. I think that's a good thing.
We got them all. We got the fact we have 4.
The one
very large companies.
The one all reputable companies as well. So I think we would do well to work with any of them. The one frustrating thing is I'm kind of hitting a roadblock with Washington Gas and getting reimbursement from them, particularly when it comes to the north end work that they did. I'm sorry, Washington Gas has reimbursed us, WSSC. Particularly the old north end work that they had done, I kind of am getting the runaround a little bit with them, but still working with them to try to get a check for reimbursements to apply to the repaving job when it is.
So if you need something from the council, you'll tell Richard that you need something from the council.
Yes. If there's some way that I feel like I could use you as a resource, I'll be sure to follow up with you. Moving on to bulk trash, that was just picked up last week. I'm also meeting with Waste Management this next week to sort of go over some lingering questions, some service issues that have cropped up. Not that we're wholly unsatisfied with them, but just so that we're all kind of on the same page. Leaf bags we talked about a little bit. They're tentatively scheduled to be delivered next week, but we're just waiting for final confirmation on that. So we'll make sure to send out an email to residents ahead of time to know exactly when they'll expect that, and the delivery will take 2 days altogether. And that's all I got.
That was a good summary.
The one thing I didn't see, and I know we've talked about in the past, is we've got our archiving schedule approved, and I know that you guys were looking into how to box the things appropriately and get things out. I think that getting some of the things archived as appropriate and then getting you the furniture that you've talked about, getting or replacing, I think is also important thing for just the function for you guys in the office. Okay. We don't want Beth's desk to actually collapse.
Well, she's there.
That would be bad.
So, just to...
Yes.
When we redid the lease, did we get approval to move the door, or was that not ever?
I don't believe that was part of the
He said he would look at any plans.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel exhausted. Do we motion to adjourn?
Yo.
Yes.
All in favor?
Okay. Okay, I turned that off.
Did you